America's Secret Destiny, presenting the evidence that America was set upon a secret course by this nation's founding fathers. A presentation of Publius Productions, delivered on December the 28th, 2009. Part 1 of 4. My name is Ralph Epperson, and I will be the one presenting this material. Let me explain first that this is a PowerPoint presentation computer program, and it will not allow me to change slides while I am speaking. So this might sound a little disjointed, and there will be short gaps while I am changing slides. I want you to also know that I am granting you permission to make copies of all parts of this DVD, and if you agree with me, may I suggest that you make copies and give them to everyone that you think might watch them so that others may learn the truth about America's future. I would like to start with a remembrance of a fine young man I met named Willie Solis. I first met him in 1983 and was instantly impressed with his opposition to the evils of communism. He was a Costa Rican who was photographed as he burned a flag in his town square. But the flag he burned was not the American flag, but the Russian flag. This was right after the world thought that the Russians had shot down the Korean Airlines flight number 007 carrying 268 civilians and American Congressman Larry McDonald. So Willie decided to show his contempt for Russia's actions by publicly burning their flag. That act certainly did not endear him to the communists in Costa Rica. I dedicated my second book to Willie with these words. I dedicate this book to Willie Solis, a freedom fighter from Costa Rica, who loved freedom so much that he was willing to pay the ultimate price for it. And he did. He was murdered by the communists. Willie Solis, 1962 to 1984, we miss you. By the way, for your information, that plane was not shot down by a Russian missile. The plane landed, and the passengers and the congressman were taken captive. Our government lied to us. And I will provide more details about that episode in my DVD entitled Only the U.S. Has Nukes. I'm going to speak about America's Secret Destiny, something I first discovered in 1985 when I started studying the symbols on the back of our dollar bill. I would dare say that this speech will not be very pleasant to hear, because what I have found is very disturbing, because I have uncovered the evidence that our founding fathers were not great and noble men as we have been taught. And when I first found this, I questioned my research because I had a great deal of difficulty in accepting this premise. And I believe that you will question it as well. Therefore, I would like to ask each of you to serve on a jury. That means I'm asking you to be open and listen to all the evidence I will present before you reach a verdict. That is all I can ask, so if you will do that, I will say that this speech will be one of the most important you will ever hear. I wrote a booklet entitled America's Secret Destiny in 1995, based upon 34 years of research. And in that booklet I discussed the evidence that I had found that our founding fathers dedicated this nation to a secret destiny in at least 1782 in a thing that they called the New World Order. That was the theme of a comment made by Henry Kissinger, America's Secretary of State, during the presidency of Richard Nixon. He was quoted as saying that America is uniquely endowed to play a creative and decisive role in the new order which is taking form around us. So Mr. Kissinger was saying that America would lead the world into this thing called the New World Order, and he said this in 1975. And according to the Birmingham News, it wasn't until the night of September the 11th, 1990, that President George Bush the father addressed the nation and claimed that the Gulf War had forged a new world order. He said something to the effect that the Persian Gulf crisis would lead to a new world order, but he failed to explain what he meant by those words. By the way, notice that this speech was delivered on September the 11th, the date of the World Trade Center attack on 9/11. I'm certain it is just another coincidence. All of the signs that I was reading during those years indicated that the New World Order desired by this nation's founding fathers and President George Bush was scheduled to start on January the 1st, 2000. But this obviously did not occur. However, that does not mean that my research was incorrect. It means that another date has been selected and that this date has truly been kept secret from legitimate researchers such as myself. It is possible that the publishing of this booklet back in 1995 and others of my books and videos convinced the conspirators to spend their target date, because the New World Order did not start on January the 1st, 2000. And even today, in 2009, I do not know why they did not do what they had promised. I started exposing the New World Order in 1985 when I toured America on a 91-city, 31-state speaking tour with my first book, entitled The Unseen Hand. The title of my speech was Secret Societies and the New World Order. Notice that this was in 1985, 5 years before George Bush mentioned the phrase in 1990. There is absolutely no way that I can prove that any of my work caused them to change their plans, but my critics cannot prove that it did not either. So you will have to decide for yourself. However, I do know that in the past, this conspiracy has altered their plans because they had been made public by some legitimate historians who found them. Let me impress upon you that these people are committed to achieving their goal, and the New World Order will occur, but at a later date. And let me add that I believe that date is very near. I first started questioning the history I had been taught in school in 1962 after a friend of mine suggested that I start reading what he called revisionist history. I told him that I was unfamiliar with that term, but that I would start reading as he suggested. My friend was introducing me to the view that holds that much of what we have been taught simply is not true, that history needs to be revised. And I had to admit that this was something that I was totally unfamiliar with. I had graduated from the University of Arizona after investing 4 years of my life in, quote, being educated, end quote. And I had to admit that I had not even been introduced to a thought that history needed to be revised. For the first time in my life, I started questioning what I had been taught. 46 years of research since then has convinced me that my friend was right. History needs to be revised. But I could not find the one book that explained the revised American history, so in 1985 I wrote the book myself. The Unseen Hand is 488 pages long and is still being purchased. It is considered by many to be the finest examination of the conspiratorial view of history ever written, and has been praised by PhDs and high school students. May I suggest that you search The Unseen Hand at Amazon.com and read 46 4- and 5-star reviews out of a total of 50 of that book. And then you can decide for yourself whether you wish to read it. But not everyone agrees. A few years ago, I received a letter from the Food and Drug Administration that I had to put the following label on each copy of this book that I sold. And this is what the label has to say. Warning, may cause dizziness. Well, I believe those who like the book and not the Food and Drug Administration. So what you are about to hear will have to undo all of what you have been taught in the past about those who created this nation known as the United States of America. By the way, this is not a typographical error. The word United in the Declaration of Independence is not capitalized. It might be important now for you to know a little more about my background so that you can know why I believe we have been deceived. I have been a student of history for 46 years, and my research has shown me that there is a massive conspiracy at work in this world. And to show you how they have managed our past, I would like first to let you know a little more about my book called The Unseen Hand, an Introduction to the Conspiratorial View of History. This book examines the evidence that the major events of the past, the wars, revolutions, and depressions, have been caused intentionally years in advance by an evil conspiracy. I call this view the conspiratorial view of history, and it is definitely not the view held by the majority of the historians today. The more traditional view of history is called the accidental view, and this view holds that the major events of the past have occurred by accident. No one really knows why these events happen, they just do. It might be appropriate at this time to define the word conspiracy. It is defined as two or more people meeting in secret with an evil purpose. And to show you that this conspiracy is real, I would like to discuss the testimony of a former president of the United States, Bill Clinton. I want you to know that this president told us on a live national broadcast in 1992 that there was a conspiracy and that he had been elected president because he was a supporter of it. And to start the discussion, I would like to show you a book that the former president, Vice President Al Gore, wrote in 1992, entitled Putting People First. And on page 217 of this book, Bill Clinton provided us with the transcript of his acceptance speech he delivered on July the 16th, 1992, when he accepted the nomination of his party as President of the United States. And on page 231, this is what he said. As a teenager, I heard John Kennedy's summons to citizenship. And then, as a student at Georgetown University, I heard that call clarified by a professor I had named Carroll Quigley. We have to go back now a few years to the summer of 1963 when Bill Clinton was selected to participate in a thing called Boys Nation, held each year in Washington, D.C. to expose the next year's senior students to life in the political arena. This is a picture of young Bill Clinton shaking the hand of President John Kennedy in the Rose Garden of the White House. This picture had to be taken during the summer of 1963 because, as you know, President Kennedy was assassinated in November of that year. As you know, Bill Clinton was elected President of the United States in 1992. And to acknowledge the defeat of George Bush, Time magazine named Bill Clinton Man of the Year in January of 1993. By the way, please notice what Time did when they placed Bill Clinton's picture in front of the letter M in the word Time. They strategically placed his head in such a way as to show the two lines of the letter M as being horns on top of his head. Were they trying to tell us something? But in truth, Time magazine should have named these two men as Men of the Year, President John Kennedy and Professor Carroll Quigley, the two men who made Bill Clinton President of the United States. Just so you know, I would like to apologize to Time magazine. I took one of their covers and cut out its picture and made this cover myself. I don't want to get sued for claiming they made a cover when they didn't. Let me now discuss how these two men made Bill Clinton President of the United States. According to the October 19, 1992 U.S. News and World Report, Bill Clinton graduated from Hot Springs High School in 1964. He then went to Georgetown University later that year. If he completed his studies in 4 years, he would have graduated in 1968. Let me show you what Dr. Quigley taught young Bill Clinton while he was at Georgetown. Dr. Quigley wrote the book entitled Tragedy and Hope in 1966 when Bill Clinton was a student there. This is a poor quality photocopy of the Georgetown Alumnus magazine for the winter of 1993, meaning 25 years after Bill Clinton graduated. It says that the book entitled Tragedy and Hope was required reading for Dr. Quigley's course. That means that Bill Clinton read this book while he was at Georgetown, and we can now read what Bill read. The inside dust cover says that Dr. Quigley was the professor of history at the Foreign Service School at Georgetown University, and that he formerly taught at Princeton and Harvard. He received his PhD from Harvard as well. So Dr. Quigley is what you would call a liberal establishment professor. Now let's see what Dr. Quigley taught young Bill Clinton. This is taken from page 950 of Tragedy and Hope. There does exist and has existed for a generation, meaning back to around 1920, an international Anglophile network which operates, by the way, the word Anglophile means primarily English. To some extent, in the way the radical right believes the Communist Act. In fact, this network, which we may identify as the Round Table groups, has no aversion to cooperating with the Communists or any other group, and frequently does so. I know of the operations of this network because I studied it for 20 years, meaning back to just after World War II, and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. And listen now to this incredible confession. I have no aversion to it or most of its instruments, but in general, my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown. And I believe its role in history is significant enough to be known. And that is why he titled his book Tragedy and Hope. This network has brought the world immense tragedy, but that they are the hope of the world. This is an absolutely staggering statement because this conspiracy planned World War II, which started in 1941, but planned it as early as 1920. And that war murdered 53 million people because this network wanted to create the United Nations. And Dr. Quigley has no aversion to that. And notice that if Bill Clinton did not rebuke the views of Dr. Quigley, as he did not, that means that Bill Clinton also has no aversion to the murder of 53 million people to give the people of the world the United Nations. That shows you just how evil this conspiracy is. And this quote comes from page 24 of Tragedy and Hope. The powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim. Nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country, and the economy of the world as a whole. This system was to be controlled by the central banks of the world. And by the way, just so you know, the privately owned Federal Reserve Bank is America's central bank. And these banks act in concert by secret agreements arrived at in frequent meetings and conferences. And here on page 954, Dr. Quigley admits that this conspiracy actually controls American communism, if not worldwide communism. It was this group of people who provided much of the framework and influence which the communist sympathizers and fellow travelers took over in the United States in the 1930s. It must be recognized that the power that these energetic left-wingers exercised was never their own power or communist power, but was ultimately the power of the international financial coterie. It now becomes appropriate to introduce you to Cecil Rhodes, one of the many people that Dr. Quigley identified as being one of these conspirators. Quigley says Mr. Rhodes feverishly exploited the diamond and gold fields of South Africa and rose to be the Prime Minister of Cape Colony between 1890 and 1896. In fact, the African nation of Rhodesia was named after Cecil Rhodes. That nation is now called Zimbabwe. In the middle 1890s, Rhodes had an annual personal income of over $5 million, which was spent so freely for his mysterious purposes, and they centered on his desire to bring all the habitable portions of the world under their control. For this purpose, Rhodes left part of his great fortune to found the Rhodes Scholarships at Oxford. So where did Bill Clinton go after graduation from Georgetown in 1968? This is once again page 36 of the U.S. News and World Report article for October the 19th, 1992. And it shows that from 1968 to 1970, Bill Clinton was at Oxford studying as a Rhodes scholar. Dr. Quigley then explained on page 582 what the Rhodes Scholarship Organization did in America. They set up a Council on Foreign Relations in New York. And then on page 950, Quigley taught Mr. Clinton. The American branch of this organization, meaning the Council on Foreign Relations, has played a very significant role in the history of the United States. So in 1988, several years after he returned to America, Bill Clinton joined the Council on Foreign Relations. And then in 1992, the Council on Foreign Relations delivered the election to President Bill Clinton. And the last quote I would like to bring to your attention is this one found on page 73 of Tragedy and Hope. Dr. Quigley wrote, "The business interests expected to control both political parties equally. Indeed, some of them intended to contribute to both and allow an alternation of the two parties in public office." That means that the Democrats would be in office for 8 years, and then the Republicans would be in office for 8 years, pretty much the same as America has been doing since the 1920s. The Republicans held the presidency under Ronald Reagan for 8 years, from 1981 to 89. The Democrats held the presidency under Bill Clinton for 8 years, from 1993 to 2001. And then George Bush was elected to 2 terms, which means he left office in 2009. And then, due to the alternating party practice, America will elect a Democrat for 8 years. And they did. They elected Barack Obama a Democrat. All because there is an international network that controls both parties equally. Now let me continue with Quigley's answer to the question, why do they want to alternate the two parties in power? Dr. Quigley taught Mr. Clinton in order to conceal their own influence, inhibit any exhibition of independence by politicians, and to allow the electorate to believe they were exercising their own free choice. I hope you can see just how important what Dr. Quigley just wrote is. We think that we, the people, are in control of our elections, that we select the best candidate from amongst the candidates who run for the presidency, and that we change things when we put the other party in office after we decide that the previous party has failed us. But Dr. Quigley says that they select the 2 candidates and then we elect one, and they win no matter who is elected. Please notice the contempt this conspiracy has for the people of the United States. We think we are electing our president, but they know that we dummies are too stupid to figure it out and get us to select a candidate from the 2 they selected for us. And they have been getting away with it ever since the 1920s. And to show you that the statement that both parties are controlled by the same people is true, let me show you the evidence that President George Bush, the father, intentionally threw the election of 1992 to Bill Clinton. There is a universal rule in politics whether you are running for the presidency of the United States or for dog catcher of Tucson. And by the way, I ran for the dog catcher in Tucson in 1996. This was one of my street signs. Unfortunately, I didn't win, but I don't think it was my campaign slogan of vote early and often that had anything to do with it. But let me get back to what I was saying. There is a universal rule in national, state, and local politics, and that is never, never, never promise a tax increase. You can talk about increasing benefits or adding new bureaus, but you never, never, never tell the electorate you will increase taxes to pay for it. because if you do, you will most certainly lose the election. The taxpayers will not vote for candidates who promise tax increases. Now, to show you that George Bush knew the rule during his presidency, he coined a very catchy phrase. Read my lips, no new taxes. This was repeated so often by comedians and others that it became known all across the United States. But the intent was to make it well known amongst the American people. So what happened next? George Bush raised taxes in 1990. George Bush lost the election of 1992. George Bush intentionally lost the election of 1992. Because just as Bill Clinton told us, both parties are controlled by the same people. And it was not a coincidence that George Bush was also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, just like Bill Clinton. That means that the conspiracy wanted Clinton in office. He had followed the yellow brick road, and a conspiracy made him president of the United States. By the way, there was a precedent for Mr. Bush's rather dramatic action. Walter Mondale, the Democrat candidate for president in 1984, did identically the same thing in his campaign race against Ronald Reagan, the Republican candidate, in the election campaign of that year. On the night of the Democratic National Convention on July the 19th, 1984, when Mr. Mondale accepted the nomination for the presidency from the Democrat Party, Mr. Mondale broke the no taxes rule with these words. Let's tell the truth. My opponent will raise taxes, and so will I. He won't tell you. I just did. And to show you that the cartoonist had a field day with Mr. Mondale's statement, this cartoon appeared in U.S. News and World Report. Mondale is shown on his bandwagon under a banner which reads, I'll raise your taxes. He's shown saying through a megaphone, come one, come all, jump on folks, hey everybody, yoo-hoo, hello, testing. And there's no one around, no one is shown jumping on his bandwagon. And the second cartoon shows Mondale holding up what appears to be a post-election Chicago Daily Tribune newspaper with the headline reading, Mondale defeats Mondale, apparently referring to his Democratic convention speech in which he promised a tax increase. And as could be predicted by anyone who knew the rule, Mondale lost the election of 1984 intentionally. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, Walter Mondale was also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Notice that both a Republican and a Democrat presidential candidate was asked to throw his election, and both of them did by breaking the no taxes rule. So this is evidence that both political parties are controlled by the same people. That means that the conspiracy wanted Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton in office. So there you have it. Clinton's conspiracy is real. President Bill Clinton is a member of the vast left-wing conspiracy he told us with his own mouth. Now let me return to the discussion of President Bill Clinton's teacher and mentor, Dr. Carroll Quigley. To Dr. Quigley's credit, he did experience a slight change of heart about his support of this conspiracy. 4 years after his death in 1977, Quigley's new book was published. It was entitled The Anglo-American Establishment. First of all, please notice that the flag of the United States shown on the dust cover of the book is upside down. This is a universal distress sign that a nation is in trouble. So the implication of the publishers is that the United States was in trouble, apparently because of this international network. And this is part of the evidence that Dr. Quigley had some reservations with what he had discovered about the power of this network. The paragraph underneath his picture on the back cover of the book says these are the words of Professor Quigley before he passed away. No country that values its safety should allow what this network accomplished. That a small number of men would be able to wield such power in administration and politics should be given almost complete control over the publication of documents relating to their actions, should be able to exercise such influence over the avenues of information that create public opinion, and should be able to monopolize so completely the writing and the teaching of the history of their own period. Welcome aboard, Dr. Quigley. You are on the right track. However, he went on. It is not easy for an outsider to write the history of a secret group of this kind, but it should be done. For this group is one of the most important historical facts of the 20th century. But agreeing with this group on goals, I cannot agree with them on methods. In this group were persons whose lives have been a disaster to our way of life. Unfortunately, their influence has been strong, and thus ends the story of Dr. Carroll Quigley. However, let me make this observation. If Dr. Quigley was alive today and I could talk to him, I would say this. If only you had said this before this international network you so strongly supported and had no aversion to murdered 53 million people in World War II, they might still be alive today. But I must be fair to Dr. Quigley. At least he figured it out and tried to correct his early support of this international network. He deserves the praise of freedom-loving people all over the world. But his attempt to clear the air poses a real problem for Bill Clinton. He also said that he had no aversion to this conspiracy. And while Dr. Quigley finally objected to its evil methods of wars, depressions, and revolutions, during Clinton's entire 8-year administration, he did not renounce the methods of this network. In fact, he appointed hundreds of their members, fellow members of the Council on Foreign Relations, to positions inside his administration. Please remember that President Clinton's hero, Dr. Quigley, said that these people had been a disaster to our way of life. But Bill Clinton appointed them anyway, even after Dr. Quigley made that statement that they were a disaster to our way of life. And let me not forget to mention the name of one individual who has been a disaster to our way of life: Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton's teacher, the man who guided him on the path to the presidency, later called him a disaster to our way of life. You will recall that Dr. Quigley wrote The Anglo-American Establishment in 1981, and Bill Clinton did not become president until 1993, 12 years later. He certainly could have read this book just like he read Dr. Quigley's first book, Tragedy and Hope. And ever since he has been out of office, he has done nothing to expose this conspiracy. Bill Clinton was encouraged to learn about this conspiracy. Bill Clinton went to Georgetown to be taught about this conspiracy. Bill Clinton then went to Oxford to learn more about this conspiracy. Bill Clinton joined the Council on Foreign Relations to become a part of this conspiracy. And Bill Clinton was made President of the United States because he had no aversion to this conspiracy. And then Bill Clinton did nothing to expose it nor stop it in its plans for America. This is the legacy of Bill Clinton's presidency. Men of decent morality will always regret that he did not have the conviction to expose them and their evil deeds. Yes, this conspiracy has truly become Bill Clinton's conspiracy. This will not be an easy speech to deliver because I too believed the lie. And I would like to repeat my request that you become a member of a jury and withhold your verdict about whether I am right or wrong until you hear all of the evidence. If you will do that, I believe the evidence that I will present will convince you that the claims I make will be proven correct. I used to believe that those who founded this nation were men of God, or at least they believed in a supreme being, and that they wrote perhaps the finest documents ever written by the mind of men when they wrote the Declaration of Independence and then the Constitution. But we have been lied to. Because I have found evidence that our founding fathers were part of an ancient conspiracy. And because they were, they set this nation on a course that few in America know anything about. Perhaps the greatest evidence that I am right comes from the pen of Benjamin Franklin, one of this nation's most influential founders. This is Mr. Franklin dressed in regalia, indicating that he was a member of the Masonic Lodge, commonly called the Masons. He signed both the Declaration of Independence in 1776 and the Constitution of the United States of America in 1787. Yet, as I hope to prove, he was a major conspirator. He assisted in the creation of the most oppressive document ever written by the mind of man, the Constitution of the United States of America. Now that is not the traditional view assigned to what most historians call the most liberating document ever written by the mind of man. And I am certainly aware of the implications of what I believe about the beginnings of this nation. What you are about to hear is perhaps the most revolutionary work ever written on the founding of this nation and the writing of both the Declaration and the Constitution. Because the Founding Fathers were conspirators, because the Founding Fathers were liars, because the Founding Fathers did not protect man's God-given unalienable rights, they took them all away. As was previously mentioned, perhaps the best example of how they accomplished this was written by Mr. Franklin himself. When he wrote his autobiography, Mr. Franklin came as close to admitting the guilt of this nation's founding fathers as it is possible to do so without directly admitting it. This is what he wrote on page 110 of his book entitled Benjamin Franklin, His Autobiography, published by P.F. Collier & Son as one of the Harvard Classics. Franklin tells us how he and some of his fellow legislators in the government tricked their fellow legislators. He and some of his fellow legislators wanted to purchase some gunpowder, but they knew the Quaker legislators in Pennsylvania would not approve the purchase of such an article of war. So they voted an act for 3,000 pounds for the purchasing of bread, flour, wheat, and other grain. After the legislation was approved, they bought gunpowder with the 3,000 pounds, and some of their fellow legislators objected, claiming that they did not authorize that. But Mr. Franklin told them that gunpowder was indeed another grain, and indeed gunpowder is a grain. They had just invented a way to conceal their trickery by hoping that the legislature would think that the phrase other grain was another ingredient of bread. And then he provided his readers with another example of their trickery and deceit. They wanted to purchase a great gun, presumably a huge cannon. They wrote up legislation to buy a, quote, fire engine, end quote, and the legislators voted for the fire engine. And Franklin bought his great gun. As Franklin pointed out, surely a great gun is a fire engine. Our founding fathers did not lie to us, they simply used words to deceive. I wrote my second book entitled The New World Order in 1990 as an attempt to identify the true motive of the conspiracy that I had uncovered in the writing of my first book. And to start the explanation of what that motive is, I must start by stating there is something coming. This thing coming is not very pleasant. And it is called the New World Order. And lastly, this information that I will be covering today will offend some of you. I am sorry for that, but I must tell the truth as I find it. I am hopeful that those offended by what I say will confirm that I am right by their own research and then take some corrective action. Our founding fathers committed this nation to the New World Order in at least the year 1782. They believed that their mission was a noble one, but they knew they had to conceal that future from the American people. So they used words to deceive, just as Mr. Franklin admitted in his autobiography. They certainly knew that their ultimate desire, the New World Order, would be very unpleasant to the American people if they knew about the system they were going to give them, and that the people would not allow them to change it. And to show you an example that will show you how they deceive us, let me show you a drawing that appeared in a book entitled A Bridge to Light by 33rd degree Mason Rex Hutchins. By the way, the 33rd degree of the Masons is the highest degree attainable, and it appears as if the 33rd degree of Freemasonry runs the Masons worldwide. And this book was published by the Masons themselves, so it is official. This is the first page of this book, showing the reader that this book has been published by the Supreme Council of the 33rd degree of the Masonic Lodge. Mr. Hutchins reproduced this drawing, showing two men, one on top and the other reversed from it on the bottom, and he called it An Aged Man and His Reflection. The word reflection is defined as a mirror image, but upside down. That means that both of these drawings should be the same, except one is reversed. So now let's look at this drawing again. Notice that the two drawings are not of the same man. All of the items on the top drawing change in the drawing of the bottom figure. For instance, the man's black shirt changes to white in the bottom drawing, the banner around his neck changes from white to black, and the words are different. So Mr. Hutchins is wrong when he says that it is a drawing of an aged man and his reflection, because many of the things in the top drawing change in the bottom drawing. If the drawing were that of a man and his reflection, the bottom figure would be a mirror image of the drawing of the top. This is that drawing on the top, and notice that the aged man has been drawn wearing what appears to be a crown with a cross on top. I believe that the crown represents government and the cross represents Christianity, the teaching on how to form that government. So this drawing represents the merger of government and religion, meaning government based upon the morality taught by Christianity, symbolized by the cross. Now let's look at, quote, the man's reflection, end quote. Now this doesn't look like a man to me, it looks like a demon. And notice that the demon is still wearing a crown, but the cross has been removed. That means that the man represents a government without the teachings of Christianity. That means that the Masons are advocating a new world order, because the new world order is a new civilization for the people of the world without the moral teachings of God. So this drawing is intended to show you the future, a government run by a demon without the teachings of Christianity. Now let me show you the involvement of the Masons in the creation of the United States. This is Henry C. Clausen, one of the past sovereign grand commanders of the Masons, meaning he was the national president for their fraternity. He was the author of a book entitled Masons Who Have Shaped Our Nation, published in 1976 by the Supreme Council of the 33rd Degree in Washington, D.C. He wrote that 23 of the 39 signers of the Constitution were members of the Lodge, and of course 23 of the 39 signers of the Constitution would be a clear majority. I have seen various estimates about the number of the signers of the Declaration of Independence who were Masons, one of which held that as many as 52 of the 56 signers were members. The Masons officially say, however, that only 9 of the signers have been cited as being members of the Masons. The reason that no one knows for certain is that many Masonic records were destroyed in the Revolutionary War of 1776. But 23 of the 39 signers were members of the Masons, which means that they were clearly the majority of the body that wrote the Constitution. So whatever they wanted, they had the authority to obtain. This is Manly P. Hall, another 33rd degree Mason, who is perhaps the greatest Masonic writer of all time. He wrote a book that was published in 1944 entitled The Secret Destiny of America, in which he discussed this nation's future. He wrote this: there exists in the world today, and has existed for thousands of years, a body of enlightened humans united in what might be termed an order of the quest. It is composed of those whose intellectual and spiritual perceptions have revealed to them that civilization, by the way, notice not just the United States but worldwide civilization has a secret destiny. Secret, I say, because this high purpose is not realized by the many. He also discussed the order of the quest in another of his books entitled The Secret Teachings of All Ages. Not only were many of the founders of the United States Masons, but they received aid from a secret body in Europe. Mr. Hall does not say who the secret body in Europe was, but it appears to have been the Illuminati formed in 1776 in Bavaria, now part of Germany, about the same time that the founders of this nation were creating the United States. He continued, which helped them to establish this country for a particular purpose known only to the initiated few. So America had a particular purpose, a secret destiny, known only to the Illuminati, the Masons, and the Order of the Quest. Mr. Hall further told us who at least some of the group known as the Order of the, or at least one of the group known as the Order of the Quest was. He wrote this on page 134 of his book entitled The Secret Destiny of America. Benjamin Franklin spoke for the Order of the Quest, and most of the men who worked with him were also members. So the Order of the Quest, the Illuminati, and the Masons created this nation with a secret destiny not to be known to the average American. And then Mr. Hall tells his readers where the evidence of this conspiracy can be found. These are the two sides of the Great Seal of the United States, and both have been reprinted on the back of every American dollar bill. Nearly all governments' seals have only one side. If the American seal has two, one side has no direct purpose. So it must have a hidden purpose, and Mr. Hall tells us that it does on page 181 of his book entitled The Secret Destiny of America, and in additional writings of his. There is only one possible origin for these symbols, and that is the secret societies which came to this country 150 years before the American Revolution. The Revolutionary War started in 1776, so 150 years prior to that year would be 1626, about the time the Pilgrims and the Puritans came to America. So Mr. Hall is saying that at about the same time the first settlers were coming to America, another group came who intended to set this nation up with a secret purpose in mind. He continued, the Great Seal was directly inspired by the Order of the Quest, and it set forth the purpose for this nation. And he added these comments in another part of the book. If the design on the eagle side is stamped with the signature of the Order of the Quest, the design on the pyramid side is even more definitely related to the old mysteries. What he was saying was that these symbols on our dollar bill are related to the ancient mystery worship of what he just called the ancient mystery religion. This is the reverse side of the Great Seal again. Notice that the eye is above the pyramid and not on it. In other words, the work of creating the New World Order is not done as yet. The Great Seal was created in 1782 and will not be completed until the eye finally seats itself upon the top of the pyramid. And there will be no world order, there will be no New World Order until the eye symbolically lands on top of the pyramid. And 46 years of research indicated that that date of that event was known to our founding fathers as January the 1st, 2000 AD. And as I said at the beginning, I cannot explain why it did not happen, and these conspirators had planned it for over 6,000 years. I believe that that means that those who designed the Great Seal in 1782 knew what they were doing. They were placing this nation on a track to some secret destiny, and they knew they had over 200 years to create the changes needed to bring it about. They knew what that the American people would never approve of their secret destiny, and that was why they kept it secret and concealed it in symbols in the Great Seal of the United States. These men had an evil purpose. They made their plans in secret, and there were two or more involved. Those are the requirements of the definition of a conspiracy. But the question to be answered is why the American people do not understand what all of the symbols on the back of the dollar bill mean. Probably less than 1 out of 100 citizens of America could explain the meaning of the pyramid, the eye, the eagle, or the Latin phrases. So all of these symbols are concealed because those who founded this nation were concealing a truth from the American people. And the reason they concealed it is because that truth is so evil that if the American people knew what it was, the conspirators would not be allowed to bring it into fruition. End of part 1. Please hold for part 2. Part 2 of 4. Now let me examine the symbols in the Great Seal of the United States. First then, it becomes important to define the Latin phrases shown on the reverse side. The phrase annuit coeptus means announcing. Coeptus means the conception of or the birth of. The second phrase is novus ordo seclorum, and it means novus, new, order, seclorum, secular, meaning world. So the phrase means the New World Order. So the Latin phrases on this side of the Great Seal are translated to mean announcing the birth of the New World Order. And this was incorporated in the Great Seal in 1782. The pyramid is another symbol, and it too has a hidden meaning. The student must question why the founding fathers in America even put a pyramid in the Great Seal at all, because there are no stone pyramids in the United States. Also notice that the American pyramid is smooth on all sides. This is a photograph of a pyramid in Latin America. Notice that it is stepped, meaning the line on each side is broken by steps constructed out of bricks or stone. But notice one thing. Twice each year, the sun rises in such a way as to shine only on the wall on one side of the stairway, revealing a snake of 6 segments, with the 7th being its head, coming down to earth from the top of the pyramid. And notice that the head of the snake has an open mouth, a symbol meaning the snake is speaking to the people, revealing a previously unknown truth to them. This is a book entitled Mysteries of the Mexican Pyramids, written by Peter Tompkins. And this is a close-up of the snake's head on the ground in front of another of the stone pyramids. Notice once again that its mouth is open. It would seem that the pyramid builders in Mexico believed that their god, the serpent, lived in the house on top of the pyramid and came to visit Earth twice a year to speak to them. Now these are the 3 most photographed pyramids in Egypt, and even though they appear to be stepped, they were constructed with smooth sides, and many of these smooth stones were removed during the early years for construction of the city of Cairo. You can still see some of the facing stones on the top of the pyramid in the center. So there must be, and is, another reason for the Founding Fathers to place a drawing of a pyramid in the Great Seal. Manly P. Hall discussed the pyramid in the Great Seal as being a model of the Great Pyramid of Giza near Cairo, Egypt. He wrote this on page 178 of his book entitled The Secret Destiny of America. Here, on the reverse side, is represented the Great Pyramid of Giza. This is perhaps the one that is featured the most of all of the pyramids in Egypt. It is the one with the secret passageways inside that lead to what Egyptologists call the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, and a room beneath the ground level underneath the pyramid called the subterranean chamber or room. It is commonly believed that the pyramid was built as a tomb for the pharaoh Khufu and his wife, but Mr. Hall believes that this belief is not correct. He wrote in the Secret Teachings of All Ages, the theory advanced by Herodotus, the father of history, and was born in approximately 485 BC and died in approximately 425 BC, and now generally accepted that the pyramid was the tomb of the pharaoh, cannot be substantiated. He then wrote about why he believed the pyramid was constructed. Hall wrote, the pyramid and the all-seeing eye represent the universal house. Notice that he said the pyramid was a house, meaning it is a place for a god to reside. Continuing, he went on, surmounted by the radiant emblem of the great architect of the universe, meaning the eye inside the triangle. So Mr. Hall is informing his readers that the pyramid was not built as a tomb, but was constructed as a house for a god to live in. And he named that god as being the great architect of the universe. I will discuss the identity of that god a little later. This is Albert Pike, the leader of the worldwide Masonic movement from 1859 to 1891, perhaps the greatest Mason of all time. He added one more piece of the puzzle when he told his readers in his book entitled Morals and Dogma that there was another important understanding of the pyramid. This book was published in 1871 by the Masons and is probably the most important book they've ever published. He wrote this on page 460 of that book. The pyramid was erected in honor of the sun. So Mr. Pike was stating that the pyramid had some connection with a worship of the sun as a god. And Mr. Hall added another ingredient to the puzzle. He said the pyramid was used to initiate men into a worship of this hidden sun god. He wrote this. The initiation took place in one of the subterranean halls of the Great Pyramid of Egypt. Through the majestic passageways and chambers of the Great Pyramid, past the illumined of antiquity, meaning those illuminated by the initiation. They entered its portals as men. They came forth as gods. Now, I would like to suspend the discussion of the Great Seal of the United States for a related subject, one that I believe I was the first historian to publish on. This discussion is extremely relevant to the general subject of America's secret destiny, as I am hoping you will see. I want to briefly show you some evidence that these initiates are all over the world, and that one of the ways you can identify an initiate is by a sign called the lion's paw, which is a sign indicating that the person giving the sign has been born again to the ancient mystery religion. And not just to the ancient mystery religion, but to the God of the ancient mystery religion, Lucifer, also called Satan, the devil. This is an Egyptian hieroglyph of a pharaoh being prepared for eternal life on a table representing a lion. You will see the lion's head on the left of the table and the tail on the right. The lion is an Egyptian symbol of eternal life. Here is another Egyptian drawing showing someone in the lion's head kneeling by the corpse of someone. I presume the X on his chest means the individual is dead. Notice again that the lion is holding an ankh, a symbol of eternal life. This is the drawing that Mr. Hall said showed a, quote, lion's paw in the Pyramid Mysteries. This drawing was put into his book entitled The Lost Keys of Freemasonry. It shows the man being raised by the lion's paw. This drawing shows that in his case, the man, not the lion, is the ankh. In his case, he's got it in his hand rather, meaning that he's being raised up into eternal life through the lion's paw. In other words, of the Masons, they say that the ceremony raises up the initiate to the ancient mystery religion, meaning he has, quote, been born again, end quote, to the God of the ancient mystery religion. Let me say this now, and as I will continue to prove, that the God of the ancient mystery religion is Lucifer, also called Satan, the devil. As you know, the Christians say that after the Christian is baptized, he is said to be born again to the God of the Bible. And here the Masons are saying that the initiate is said to be born again to the God of the ancient mystery religion. So may I recommend that whenever you hear someone say they are born again, ask them to whom they are born again to. As we just saw, it is possible to be born again to Lucifer or to be born again to Jesus. This is the statue of Khufu, also called Cheops, the Greek name for Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid. This is the earliest use of the symbol that I found. Notice the position of Khufu's right hand. That sign is called the lion's paw. This is the statue of Khufu's high priest Cal. The article accompanying the photograph said that he served all three pharaohs who built pyramids on the Giza Plateau. This is a drawing of Napoleon. I have read where some historians think that he was a member of the Illuminati, but establishing that fact has been difficult. Notice here that he is shown concealing the lion's paw under his coat. We will see this particular form of the sign concealed inside his coat in the photographs of other Luciferians. This is Anton LaVey, a Satanist and the founder of the Church of Satan. This is Annie Besant, the only woman I found so far that is giving the same lion's paw. She was an admitted Luciferian. This is a photocopy of a page from Captain William Morgan's book on the rituals of the Masons. Here is a Mason on the right side of the page giving what they call the sign of a fellow craft, but it's actually the lion's paw. This is the photograph of Lieutenant Elisha Hunt Rhodes, a Mason during the Civil War. I found his picture in a book about Freemasonry at Gettysburg. Notice that he is also giving the sign underneath his coat, just like Napoleon was. This is a photograph of Karl Marx, the so-called father of communism. Marx became a Satanist while at college, and he was a member of the Illuminati. This is Nikolai Lenin, the brutal Russian communist dictator who started the Communist Revolution in Russia in 1917. This is a statue of Joseph Stalin, the brutal dictator of Communist Russia. He's giving the sign halfway in and halfway out of his coat. And this is a photograph taken off of the internet of him giving the same sign. So the statue is based upon real life. Lenin and Stalin together murdered 40 million Russians in that communist revolution in the early 20th century. And they both were involved as having been born again to Lucifer, Satan, the devil. Isn't it an interesting coincidence that both these men were dedicated Luciferians? This is John Wilkes Booth, the assassin of President Abraham Lincoln. Booth was a Knights Templar Mason, which is a branch of the overall Masonic Lodge, and the sign he is giving, I believe, is the sign of the Knights of the Golden Circle, a 14,000 member secret society formed prior to the Civil War. In fact, this group was formed in 1837 in Europe, and they were the organization that planned the Civil War 24 years before it started. The sign is very the sign is very similar to the lion's paw, and the reason it might be is because there were members of the Knights who were also members of the Masons. This is a photograph of Jesse James, the famous outlaw, on the left, and his brother Frank James on the right. Notice that Frank is giving the lion's paw sign because he was a member of the Masons. The sign being given by Jesse is, I believe, the sign of the Knights of the Golden Circle because it is known that Jesse was a member. By the way, Jesse James later became a 33rd degree Mason. This small photograph is of Alan Pinkerton, the head of the Pinkerton Detective Agency. He was giving a sign that shows that he was a member of the Masonic Lodge. Mr. Pinkerton was hired to capture Jesse and Frank James, but he never accomplished that goal, and I think the reason he didn't is because he knew that Jesse and Frank were Masons, and Masons take an oath to protect their brothers. This is Bloody Bill Anderson, a lieutenant in Quantrell's Raiders during the Civil War. He's giving a sign showing that he was a member of the Knights of the Golden Circle. This man led murders into attacking individuals and families during the Civil War. It has been claimed that Jesse James rode with him during that time. And I would suggest that this is where Jesse learned about the Knights of the Golden Circle. He must have learned about the Masons from his brother Frank, who was already a member by the time of the Civil War. This is Salmon P. Chase, the Secretary of the Treasury in President Lincoln's cabinet and a member of the Masons. He is the individual after whom the Chase Manhattan Banks are named. Many believe that the Chase Manhattan Banks are owned in Maine by the Rockefeller family, and they have been supporters of the Illuminati conspiracy for generations. I have two more to show you, and they are real eye-openers. So get ready, because I believe that you will find these two pictures to be very disturbing. This is the February 17, 1986 cover of Time magazine, and as you can see, it shows a picture of the television evangelist Pat Robertson clearly giving the lion's paw sign on his chest. I want you to particularly notice the grin on Mr. Robertson's face. It appears to be the smile of someone who knows a secret and knows that he cannot tell us. And now we know what that secret is. If Pat knew what this sign meant, he is a Luciferian, not a Christian. And the reason he is grinning could be that he knows what he is doing and that we do not know. And on the chance that you find that a little harsh, ask yourself why he was photographed giving this particular sign. Let us presume for a moment that he was asked by the photographer to assume this particular pose and didn't know what the sign meant. How many photographs in the world do you think show someone giving this particular pose? I have been looking for pictures of this sign for probably 20 years, and I have found but maybe 25 of them. One would presume that Mr. Robertson would have asked the photographer why he wanted him to stand this way. It is further presumed that most people being asked to pose this way would not do so, simply because they did not understand what it represented. It certainly isn't a normal way to stand, whether for a photograph or not. So what was the reason that Pat agreed to stand this way? I do not know, except I suspect that it was his way of telling those in the world who saw the photograph and knew what the sign meant that he was one of them, a Luciferian. It might be remembered that Pat was running for the presidency of the United States in 1986, and this was his way of informing others that he was under their control because he was one of them. This is the only thing that makes sense. A Christian minister, Dr. David Weber, who ran the Southwest Radio Church, was a fellow member of a group of Christians who broadcast radio and television programs on America's airwaves. He reported on his radio program that he took this Time magazine cover of Pat giving the sign and asked him directly why he was photographed that way. And according to Dr. Weber, Pat responded, "I fell off my horse and injured my arm." If you believe that, I will sell you my shares in the Brooklyn Bridge. And the final photograph is not a photograph, but a portrait of President George Washington. I must admit that it is a portrait and not a photograph because there were no cameras when Washington lived, so no one can certify that he posed for this portrait. But that statement begs the question. Because this is an official portrait of Washington released by the George Washington Masonic National Memorial Association. This is their building in Washington, D.C. So even if Washington did not pose for this portrait, why would the Masons release it as an official portrait of him? The only explanation that makes sense is that the Masons are using the portrait to inform those who are born again to Lucifer that George Washington was as well. Now I'd like to get back to our study of America's secret destiny. The Masons, the Order of the Quest, and the Illuminati were directly involved in a belief in an ancient mystery religion. Albert Pike wrote on page 624 of his book entitled Morals and Dogma, Masonry is identical with the ancient mysteries, and that is true. The ancient mystery religion is 6,000 years old and is found on every continent, in every culture, and in every religion. So now back to the issue. 23 of the 39 signers of the Constitution were members of the Masonic Lodge, and many, according to Manly P. Hall, were members of the Order of the Quest. Ben Franklin, a Mason and involved in the Order of the Quest, admitted that they used words to deceive. The symbols of the Great Seal of the United States that they designed are concealing hidden truths from the American people, and these were the men who formed the government of the United States. Now let me show you a way you can tell who designed the Great Seal of the United States. This is once again the front side of the seal showing the eagle. Notice that above the head of the eagle is a 6-pointed star made out of 13 5-pointed stars. This is a close-up of that symbol. This 6-pointed star is, of course, the Star of David, a symbol of the Jewish faith, but it is also a Masonic symbol. But the Masons are not a Jewish organization. They are non-denominational in that they allow each member to believe in whatever God he chooses to believe in. And I shall discuss that a little later in this series. And here is some of the evidence that it is a Masonic symbol. This is a photograph of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Freemasons in Maryland. And this is a close-up of the building to the right. And you will see 4 of the 8 or 9 6-pointed stars on the top of the building. But the Masons use the symbol as a sign of the Masons, and in all of my research I have never seen an explanation as to why it is one of their symbols. So I can only give you my opinion. The reason seems to be that they do so because of the hidden number 13 in the star itself. This is a drawing of the 6-pointed star, and it has, of course, 6 outer points. And this six-pointed star illustrates the fact that there are a total of 7 shapes in the star, 6 triangles, and the 6-sided hexagon. Obviously, 6 plus 7 totals 13. I have drawn in the 6 lines to make up the 6-pointed star, and you will notice that it is made up of 2 triangles, one pointed down and one pointed up. Now we're going to transport these lines from the eagle side to the pyramid side of the Great Seal. And this is a slide showing you how it looks when you put the 6-pointed star down on the pyramid. Now notice that the triangle with the eye in it points to a blank space between the 2 words annuit and sceptus. But the other 5 points point to 5 letters. A at 10 o'clock, S at 2 o'clock, N at 8 o'clock, the second O in ordo at 6 o'clock, and M at 4 o'clock. These 6 letters, or 5 letters rather, are together A-S-N-O-M. There is a word in a dictionary that describes the scrambling of letters in a word to conceal the actual word. And that word is anagram. A-S-N-O-M is an anagram for M-A-S-O-N, the Masons. So it is clear, the Masons are the men who designed the Great Seal. The Masons hide things in plain sight. We all carry these dollars, and only a few in America know the secrets they contain. Now let me show you how the Masons legally grab more power in the Constitution than any dictator or tyrant in history. For years, the American people have been told that the American form of government, a constitutional republic, is the finest form ever devised by man, and that the American Constitution is the finest document ever written by the mind of man. And I used to believe that as well, until I discovered the fact that the Founding Fathers literally placed a phrase in our Constitution that they knew would later destroy the nation. Because as thousands of today's patriots have discovered when they have gone to the courts of America to argue the constitutionality of various laws and regulations, they've learned that the Constitution of the United States of America is null and void. There are no constitutional rights in the courts of the United States today. And the reason that is so is because this nation's founding fathers set it up so that our God-given unalienable rights would no longer be rights, but would be privileges granted by government. And the reason they did that was because they were members of the Masons, the Illuminati, or the Order of the Quest, or any combination of these groups. To prove that the Constitution is null and void in America today, we must go back to the year of 1776, when the Founding Fathers declared this nation's independence from Great Britain. The Declaration of Independence was just that. This nation was declaring its independence from the government of Great Britain. Those who wrote it were complaining about the tyranny being imposed upon the American people by King George, the King of England. And the proof of that is found in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. We, the people, wrote, "The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations." The word usurpation is defined as the illegal seizure of sovereign power. The American people were reclaiming their sovereignty by declaring their own independence from the tyranny of the king. The word sovereignty is defined by a dictionary as being supreme in power. The word sovereign is defined as being unlimited by any other meaning any other person or government. The Declaration continues, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To understand what that means, it becomes important to define the word tyranny. Webster's 1828 dictionary, meaning the dictionary is close to the date of 1776 that is available, defines the word simply as absolute or unlimited power. So it is fair to conclude that the Founding Fathers felt that King George was creating a tyrannical government in America by stealing the sovereignty of the American people and replacing it with his own. And that was the reason they were breaking the bonds with the English government. So our Founding Fathers knew what the word tyranny meant, and to further prove that, the writers of the Constitution actually attempted to further define the word in the Declaration of Independence itself. They listed 30 specific evidences in the Declaration of the fact that King George was guilty of creating an oppressive totalitarian government, meaning a tyranny, in the United States. The 22nd of these is the one that clearly addresses the issue. He, meaning King George, has given his assent to the suspending of our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. Power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. That is the key phrase in red. Legislate in all cases whatsoever. That is the very definition of tyranny. There are no limits to that grant of power. They were grabbing absolute, dictatorial, tyrannical power. There is no Magna Carta, no Bill of Rights, no Constitution to protect the rights of the people. It is absolute power. The Constitution was issued in 1787, 11 years after the Declaration. The following is from the preamble of the Constitution. We the people, notice the people, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. It was here that the crime of our Founding Fathers was first started, because the Founding Fathers actually created two separate governments inside the Constitution, and they gave one of them absolute tyrannical power. So they had to build a front in order to conceal their crime. Perhaps the best way I can illustrate what they did is to show you a theme park called Old Tucson, located outside of Tucson, Arizona. Here in 1939, in the desert outside of Tucson, the makers of the movie Arizona constructed a movie set out of adobe mud for the movie. It was later transformed into a theme park called Old Tucson. The owners have covered up many of the original mud adobe buildings with wood frame buildings that make the city look as if it had been built in the 1880s. Just as a point of non-important trivia, I've marked the spot with an X where actor and singer Dean Martin stood when he later got hit on the head in one of those John Wayne movies. Aren't you glad you watched this presentation this far so you could learn that? Of course you are. Now, back to the presentation. As long as you walk down the main street of the park, the buildings look real. But many of these buildings are nothing more than a front, with no side, floor, or roof, but they give the appearance from the front of being a complete building. Take, for instance, this church building, because this is the front view. And this is the back view. And there is no building, but from the front, it looks like a complete building. As long as you look at the Constitution without really examining it, we see the magnificence of the document. But if you look behind the words, as we are going to do in a minute, you will find that it is all a false front, just like some of the buildings in Old Tucson. The Founding Fathers built a set, like Old Tucson, around the Constitution. We see the false front and think that is the Constitution. But those who walk around back and see the false back of the document know that we have bought some more fire engines and other grain. The Founding Fathers had to construct this elaborate facade so that anyone who read the Constitution would see the aged man and his reflection and not the demon God. They were to see the power being divided, not the power being centralized. And because of this, we the people have missed the fatal flaw, the one that was intentionally placed in the Constitution so that it would later destroy the very rights it was intended to protect. It is my opinion now that the Constitution is the most oppressive document ever written by the mind of man. Article 1 of the Constitution created the legislative branch. Article 2 created the executive branch. And Article 3 created the judicial branch. We've been told that this was to divide the power and not give too much power to any one branch of the government. And it is in Article 1 and Section 8 that grants the legislative branch 18 specific powers, and these are listed one after the other. This reads in part, Congress shall have power to collect taxes, to coin money, to establish post offices, to declare war, for instance. Now, I must commend the Founding Fathers for their amazing insight into the future. They had the foresight to predict that universities would one day field football teams, and that they would form associations to regulate all of their sports activities, including the scheduling of bowl games. This is an article in the Arizona Daily Star on December the 10th, 2009, in which a House subcommittee approved legislation aimed at forcing college football to switch to a playoff system to determine its national champion. I simply cannot understand how our Founding Fathers could have envisioned such a thing as a national championship football game in 1787. But certainly they must have, because Congress believes it has the delegated power to force the colleges to change their own procedures in declaring a national champion football team. And on a second review of all the 18 powers granted to Congress, I found this. Congress shall have the power to require universities who field a football team to switch to a playoff system to determine a national champion. Because the powers delegated in the Constitution are very specific, meaning that our Founding Fathers gave Congress these and only these powers. So if Congress feels they have this power, they must have it. Because congressmen and congresswomen take oaths to protect and defend the Constitution. And that means they must know what it gives them in the way of powers. Or so we have been told. But we have been lied to. So I made that power up. So we must find another source for the power to do this. And there is a power to force the football universities that play football to schedule a different playoff system. And this is what they wrote in part. It wrote in part in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, as they were granting powers to Congress. Congress shall have the power to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever. Notice that the Founding Fathers used the very same phrase, the power to legislate in all cases whatsoever, that they used in the Declaration of Independence to define the tyrannical power of King George. They gave Congress the power to legislate in all cases whatsoever. And that means they gave Congress tyrannical power. The Constitution was written only 11 years after the writing of the Declaration, and many of the people signing the Declaration also signed the Constitution. It is impossible not to conclude that the Founding Fathers gave Congress tyrannical power. They did so in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. So that means that Congress must know that they have the power to force the universities to switch to a playoff system. They must know that they have total, unlimited power. And that power was given to them by the Founding Fathers in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. The power to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever. If I had the power to time travel back to the year 1787, while the Founding Fathers discussed the writing of the Constitution of the United States, and suddenly appear, I would not be too kind, because I knew what they were doing to the future of this nation. I would tell them that I knew what sort of document they were going to write, and that I considered them to be contemptible traitors to the American people. Because what they did to the American people is one of the most disgusting treacheries in the history of mankind. Because they did not inform the American people just what they were doing, because they knew that if they did, they would never be allowed to do it. And now we know just what the future they envision for us is, and I must say it is not pleasant. Let me now get current and discuss why the Congress feels it has the power to create a health care system that is close to passing here in December of 2009. This is President Barack Obama at a campaign rally, and the slogan behind him reads, "Change we can believe in." One of the changes he was campaigning for was a call to remake this nation's health care system. So the question is, where is the delegated power to do such a thing? Is there such a delegated power in the listing of the specific powers in Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution? And any fair reading of those powers does not reveal any such delegated powers. But they do have this power. It is listed in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. Congress shall have the power to legislate in all cases whatsoever. Now, it is important to notice that the writers of the Constitution did restrict that tyrannical power to just one place, Washington, D.C. They wrote, Congress shall have the power to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district as may become the seat of the government of the United States, meaning Washington, D.C. So the original intent was to limit this tyrannical power to the seat of the government of the United States, shown here by the map. It is also important to recall that the Constitution was written by the people of the United States of America. So they wrote about both the United States and the United States of America. This tyrannical power was intended to be extended only over the 10-mile square of Washington, D.C. They have limited power in the United States of America. That means that there are two constitutional governments in America, the United States of America and the United States. But the story of how this power has spread all over the remainder of the United States is very interesting. There was not much concern with the tyrannical government of the United States until the 13th and 14th Amendments were passed in 1865 and 1868 after the Civil War. Let's examine the 13th Amendment first. It reads, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, shall exist within the United States." Now, slavery is a situation where one person has lost his freedom to another. A synonym of slavery is involuntary servitude, meaning when a person is forced to serve another without the first person's consent. Involuntary means that the person does not want to do what he's being forced to do. But notice that by these two definitions, voluntary servitude is permissible. That means that we are free to voluntarily become a slave anytime we want. Only involuntary servitude is not permitted. If you want to become a slave, you are free to do so. Now, with that understanding, we can now discuss the 14th Amendment. That one reads, "All persons." Notice that the word is changed from people to persons. We now have to discuss the difference between a person and being a people. We used to be called people, and now we are called persons, and there is an important distinction between the two words. I will not spend a lot of time on this, but I will show you that there is a difference. People are sovereign, living under God-given rights. Persons are individuals living under government-granted privileges. I have to now define the two words right and privilege. A right is the ability to act morally without asking permission. A privilege is the ability to act morally, but only after permission has been granted. When a person is sovereign, he does not need to ask permission to morally make his decisions on how he runs his life. So the 13th Amendment makes voluntary servitude permissible. So we have lost our sovereignty under this new word, persons. A sovereign would be a free man whose rights were God-given and unalienable, which means that only the grantor can take them away. Rights are granted by God, and only God can take them away. No government, no majority, no minority, no one can take them away. But more importantly, a privilege is not unalienable. It can be taken away by the person or entity granting it. Now let's go back to the 14th Amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States. If we were declared to be citizens of the United States after the 14th Amendment was passed in 1868, what were we before the 14th Amendment? We were citizens of a particular state of the Union, and only that. You were a citizen of the state in which you were born or where you were residing after birth. You were a citizen of Arizona if you were born in Tucson. But notice that in the 14th Amendment, there are two ways to become a citizen of the United States, meaning a citizen of the tyrannical government of Washington run by Congress. You can be born in Washington, D.C., or you can become naturalized in Washington, D.C., meaning the United States. A naturalized citizen is one who is voluntarily asked to become a citizen. For example, a citizen of France leaves his country and comes to the United States. He wishes to become a naturalized citizen, one who voluntarily renounces his citizenship in another country to become a citizen of the second country. So once you are acknowledged as a citizen of the United States, you must agree to their jurisdiction over your person. They were sovereign people who had no master, who lived by right. We are now citizens of the United States who live by privilege. Actually, the 14th Amendment affords you dual citizenship. It continues. All persons born or naturalized are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. So the citizens of the United States have dual citizenship. They are citizens of Washington, D.C., and they are citizens of the state wherein they reside. That means that the 14th Amendment did not eliminate the citizenship of the state citizen. It added the citizenship of Washington, D.C. So the question is, how did we become a citizen of the United States? If we were not born in Washington, D.C., and if we did not voluntarily become a naturalized citizen of the United States. Those who wrote the 13th and 14th Amendments needed us to volunteer to become U.S. citizens, to trade our rights for government-granted privileges. They had to trick us. And they tricked us into becoming a naturalized citizen of the United States. And then they could claim that we had voluntarily volunteered to be a servant of the U.S. government. So we were tricked into buying some other grain and a fire engine. Benjamin Franklin told us they would deceive us with words. We were not told that we did this when we voluntarily asked for the Socialist Security Card issued by the government of the United States. The American people have been told that they were required to obtain this card. But there are experts in federal law that can find no such law passed by Congress requiring them to do so. So that means that the American people voluntarily signed up for the card and the Socialist Security benefits. And when they did, they became a naturalized citizen of the United States and therefore became subject to the jurisdiction of the tyrannical government. And the reason we did this was because we believed we had to. But there is no law requiring anyone to obtain a Socialist Security card. It is also important to point out that those who have done the research into this problem have discovered that there is no law requiring the citizens of the various states of the Union to pay federal income taxes either. But understand, so far this is not proof, it's only research. Because it is my opinion that there will never be a test case where a jury finds that the income tax is illegal, because it can be assumed that the government would not want to make that truth known to the American people. I am a self-employed writer who does not have an employer, and since I have no salary, I cannot deduct taxes from a payroll. So I must make an estimated tax payment each quarter to the Internal Revenue System. And I do this on a tax form number 1040 ES. there is a paragraph in the printed instructions that reads, who must make estimated tax payments. These rules apply to U.S. citizens. Notice that the IRS says that these rules are rules and not laws. And secondly, notice that these rules apply to U.S. citizens. That must mean that if you are not a naturalized citizen of the United States, nor born in Washington, D.C., these rules do not apply to you, because only U.S. citizens must pay the income tax. Notice that I am not saying that you should stop paying income taxes. I'm saying that it appears as if the income tax must be paid by those who have voluntarily become a naturalized citizen of the United States by applying for a Socialist Security card. Let me just repeat what Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17 authorizes Congress to do. Congress shall have the power to legislate in all cases whatsoever. And that is unlimited power. They have the power to enforce law where there is no law. Everything that Congress is doing today is constitutional. Remember, I will repeat it. They have unlimited power, and it was given to them by our founding fathers. And who were our founding fathers? They were members of the Masonic Lodge, the Order of the Quest, and or the Illuminati. Let me add the final piece of the puzzle to convince you that I'm right. The 10th Amendment reads, the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, are reserved to the states or to the people. That means that if the Constitution did not specifically list the power in Article 1, Section 8, Congress does not have the power. That means the power has to be specifically delegated, and if it is not specifically delegated, the Congress does not have the power. End of Part 2. Please go to disc number 2 for Part 3. America's Secret Destiny, Part 3 of 4. This is James Madison, the 4th President of the United States. He has been called the father of the Constitution during the deliberations on this document. He, along with Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, were asked to write a series of articles for a newspaper in New York City as an effort to explain the type of government they were creating. These essays have been published as the Federalist Papers so we can know what our founding fathers were thinking as they wrote the Constitution. And Mr. Madison discussed the delegated powers in Article 1, Section 8 with these words. The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state government are numerous and indefinite. So Madison was saying that the only powers the United States has are few and defined, meaning they have to be listed. And if they are not listed, the United States does not have them. And to put the final argument to Madison's position, I would like to quote the 10th Amendment to the Constitution once again. It reads, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution are reserved to the states or the people. So Congress only has delegated powers, or in the words of James Madison, these powers are few and defined. But Congress has funded the following items: stem cell research, space capsules, Hubble space telescopes, and trips to the moon, amongst other things. Where is the delegated power to do each of these things? If the Constitution does not specifically say Congress shall have the power to tax the people for stem cell research, Congress does not have the power to fund stem cell research. How could the Founding Fathers ever conceived of such a thing as stem cell research back in 1787? And the answer is that they couldn't, and if they couldn't, they didn't. And if they didn't, then Congress doesn't. But Congress has. So that means that Congress must know that they have unlimited power. They must know they have the power to legislate in all cases whatsoever. So they must know that they should never tell the American people they have this unlimited power. So just pay your taxes, and pay your taxes, and pay your taxes, and pay your taxes. And just hope that they leave you enough money to live on. Because they have the power to tax everything that you earn. Because you voluntarily gave them that power. Thank you, Ben Franklin, for your words to deceive. Thank you, Founding Fathers, for the power to legislate in all cases whatsoever. Thank you, Masons, Order of the Quest, and of the Illuminati, for your ability to conceal the truth from us. I would now like to continue the idea that the Constitution was granted unlimited power to Congress. This is a rather poor quality photograph of Howard Freeman, who was, in my opinion, this nation's greatest constitutional authority. I had the pleasure of having met him several times out on the lecture circuit or at a summer camp. He once came to my hometown of Tucson to speak to a club that I was a member of, and his host invited me to his home to meet with other guests and talk with Mr. Freeman. He told us two stories from his personal experience that I would like to retell now because they are extremely pertinent to the study of America's secret destiny. Mr. Freeman told us that he was asked to testify as an expert witness in the case of a friend of his who had stopped paying income taxes because he did not think he was legally obliged to do so. This friend of his was charged with willful failure to file. When Mr. Freeman was on the stand, he was asked to cite various Supreme Court decisions that provided the evidence that this defendant did not have to pay income taxes. Mr. Freeman said that he was elated that he was able to get these decisions into the court record. When Mr. Freeman completed his testimony and the trial had ended, the judge spoke to the jury. I don't know if that's the real judge or not, but that might have been, before they were dismissed to reach a verdict. The judge told the jury, "You are to completely ignore the testimony of Howard Freeman." Mr. Freeman was shocked, and he left the courtroom to meet with the judge as he was going into his office. He asked the judge, "By what authority do you overturn the standing decisions of the United States Supreme Court?" And the judge replied, "Those were old decisions prior to 1938. And Mr. Freeman said, Those are standing decisions. They have not been overturned. I do not care how old they are. You have no right to overturn a standing decision of the United States Supreme Court in a lower district court. Mr. Freeman then asked the judge what had happened in 1938. The judge said that he had already told Mr. Freeman too much and that he wasn't going to tell him anymore. He ended their conversation by walking into the room so that Mr. Freeman could no longer question him. Mr. Freeman then went to a law library to see if he could find a Supreme Court decision dealing with this issue. And he found the Erie Railroad versus Tompkins case of the 1938 Supreme Court. For the purist who wants to read the case, it is found on page 64 of the October term 1937 Syllabus 304 U.S. Certiorari to the Circuit Court, I don't know how to pronounce that, Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, number 367, argued January the 31st, 1938, decided April 25th, 1938, and there's the case on the right side of this screen. The case consists of 4 paragraphs in sequence, and the third one reads as follows. There is no federal general common law. And it now becomes important to discuss what the common law is, and I'll make it brief since I am not an expert on the subject. The simplest explanation of the common law is this: man is only guilty of harm if he damages another person's property or injures his person, which means there is no damage unless someone or something is injured. The Constitution used to be this nation's common law, but according to this judge, the Supreme Court ruled that the Constitution was no longer the supreme law of the land. Mr. Freeman then told us that a short time later he met a retired state Supreme Court justice who told him that they needed to talk. When the two of them met, the judge told him that he was a retired state of Wyoming Supreme Court justice who had been appointed to that position while he was a federal judge in Wyoming. He then asked Mr. Freeman not to reveal his identity because he could, quote, get into a lot of trouble, end quote, by revealing too much. Mr. Freeman agreed that he would not ever reveal his name in any of his discussions of the proceedings in the courts of America. And the judge told him this story. In 1938, notice the year, 1938, all the higher judges, higher federal judges, the top attorneys and the U.S. attorneys were called into a secret meeting by President Franklin Roosevelt, who recalled to their attention that in 1933 he had suspended the redemption of our gold certificates in gold. This is a sample of a gold certificate. You will notice that America's money used to have a promise to redeem the paper certificate in gold with these words as shown in the red rectangle. This is to certify that there is on deposit in the Treasury of the United States of America $100 in gold, payable to the bearer on demand. What this means is that the possessor of a gold certificate could take it into a bank and request that that value shown on the certificate in gold, he could ask for it, and that the bank would provide the holder with that amount of gold on demand. But in 1933, President Roosevelt suspended this requirement to allegedly assist in controlling the after effects of the great stock market crash of 1929. In other words, the American people could no longer get their gold for their gold certificates. This was a contract of the United States government with the holder that they could obtain their gold for their certificate anytime they wanted. Notice that this phrase does not say subject to revocation on the whim of a president. America was revoking a standing contract by no longer honoring the terms of that contract. Roosevelt then went on to explain the international bankers who own America's national debt had declared that the suspension of the redemption clause on our money was an act of a bankrupt nation. The president was admitting that the nation was now totally owned by the international bankers. And as the new managers of this nation, they could set the rules and regulations under which we lived. Roosevelt was telling these judges that the international bankers had decided that they as judges could no longer adjudicate cases on the Constitution of the United States, the supreme law of the land. They were to use the Uniform Commercial Code as the new supreme law of this land, with one exception. Roosevelt told the judges and the attorneys that they had to take silent judicial notice of the fact that the Constitution was null and void and that we were living under a new set of laws called the Uniform Commercial Code. That meant, in language that only judges and presidents and attorneys understand, you cannot tell the dummies. You must use language that makes it sound like it is coming from a constitution, but it isn't. But whatever you do, never tell the people of America. And ever since 1938, they have succeeded with only a few exceptions. And to show you that, in my opinion, the current Congress knows they have the unlimited power of the grant to legislate in all cases whatsoever. And that they must not tell the American people that the Constitution is null and void. Let me illustrate the point by bringing up the case of Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House. She was asked where she got the authority to even consider legislation that would remake the nation's health care system. And she answered, from the power to regulate interstate commerce. Now let me point out that Congress did grant that specific power in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 of the Constitution. It reads, Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce among the several states. But here is the question. If Congress has had the power since the Founding Fathers gave it to them, why did Congress wait until the year 2009, over 200 years later, to consider legislation to remake the healthcare system? Madison did say that the powers were few and defined, and I must admit the Commerce Clause words are not defined by the Constitution itself. However, Alexander Hamilton, in Federalist Paper number 22, did discuss what they meant by the phrase. He wrote, the interfering regulations of some states have given just cause of complaint to other states, and it is to be feared that examples of this nature not restrained by a national control, meaning some sort of power being given to Congress to regulate interstate commerce, would be multiplied till they become injurious impediments to the intercourse between different states. Putting that language into today's terms, he meant Congress was giving the power to protect commerce between states when one state might be causing problems for shipments across their state borders. And now again, I must ask, why did Congress decide on remaking the nation's healthcare system over 200 years after they were deemed to have received that power? And the answer is simply that the Founding Fathers knew what those words meant and that it did not give them this power. And the evidence lies in the answer to the question. Has America been plagued by frequent disputes between various states about medical care? And I would think you would have to agree that we have not experienced this in the past. Secondly, let me be so bold as to ask the Congresswoman, is the Commerce Clause the authority to pass legislation funding trips to the moon, space telescopes, space satellites, stem cell research, and any other purpose not known to the Founding Fathers? Because none of those powers were granted to Congress either. And it is very obvious to conclude that she is not telling the truth when she makes this claim, because she must know about the power to legislate in all cases whatsoever given to her in the U.S. Constitution. But she still has been instructed to not tell the American people. In other words, she has been instructed to take silent judicial notice of this fact. So she makes up this absurd claim to cover the fact that she simply cannot tell the American people the truth. And I will explain why this legislation is being considered and quite likely will pass towards the end of this presentation. But suffice it to say that I believe that Congress does know that they have the unlimited power of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, the power to legislate in all cases whatsoever. In other words, they have the power to do whatever they jolly well want to do. Yes, the sign on the podium in front of the Congresswoman tells us what she believes in: a new direction for America. Congresswoman Pelosi believes in a broad power to do whatever she and the majority of the Congress wants under the Commerce Clause. Apparently she had never read this quotation from Thomas Jefferson, the principal author of the Declaration of Independence and the third President of the United States. This is what he said about the Constitution and her liberal interpretation of the Commerce Clause. Free government is founded in jealousy and not in confidence. It is jealousy which prescribed limited constitutions to bind down those whom we are obliged to trust with power. That our Constitution our Constitution has accordingly fixed the limits to which and no further our confidence may go. In questions of power, then, let no more be said of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. It seems to me that Jefferson was certainly a champion of delegated powers, meaning that Congress has only very specific powers to bind Nancy Pelosi down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. But of course, Nancy Pelosi knows more than James Madison and Thomas Jefferson. I will say this: if we allow Nancy Pelosi to extend the power of government into every corner of American life under the Commerce Clause, we will surely have a new direction for America. Next, I would like to provide you with some evidence that my contentions, additional evidence that my contentions are correct. First of all, I would like to include parts of a letter I received in August of 2009 from a practicing attorney in the United States. I shall not name this attorney because I will protect his privacy, and because I am certain his fellow attorneys would not appreciate his putting these thoughts into writing. He was responding to an appearance I made on a talk show in his area wherein I discussed the Supreme Court decision that totally eliminated the Constitution and the common law. I then discussed the evidence that we were living under the Uniform Commercial Code. This is how he described himself. I am an attorney and I've been practicing for 14 years. And I am licensed in 3 states. And have actually been blessed with the opportunity to be involved in cases all over the United States. He then wrote this: I enjoy and applaud your work. I've come to the same conclusions on most issues so far. And to some degree, I am still working on it. And then he added this comment: I've heard this argument many times that there is a big secret underlying the modern court system, which is actually a uniform commercial court. And the lawyers and judges guard the secret, like they were part of some secret society. And that if you say the magic words or indicate that you know the secret, the judges and lawyers will know that you were on to their big secret, and you will be given special treatment. So once we tell the truth, it is no longer a big secret, and I just did. Let me give you one more bit of evidence that the Constitution is null and void and that the Supreme Court knows this. This is, of course, Barack Obama, recently elected President of the United States. And this is a picture of the President with his mother. And this is a picture of the young President with his father. A citizen of Kenya, a nation on the eastern side of Africa. And this is the future president in a picture taken in Kenya. He is the second man from the left in the back row, as shown in the red rectangle. The woman in the bright yellow dress is Barack Obama's grandmother, the mother of Barack's father. She has been quoted as saying that Barack was born in Kenya, and that claim has been substantiated by his half-brother and his half-sister. Now this poses a real problem. The Constitution of the United States says this about the qualifications of the President. This is how Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution reads. No person, please notice the word is person, no person except a natural-born citizen shall be eligible to the office of President. And those 2 words, natural-born, means that the person has to be born inside the 50 states of the United States of America. Therefore, if Mr. Obama was born in Kenya, he is a citizen of Kenya, And since he was not born in America, he cannot be president. And Philip Berg, an attorney from Pennsylvania, has filed a motion in the Supreme Court of the United States in 2008 asking them to decide if Barack Obama is constitutionally eligible to become president. I was able to call in during a radio talk program prior to the inauguration of Mr. Obama in January of 2009 when Mr. Berg was a guest of that host. And I told Mr. Berg that I wanted to thank him for his attempt to ask the Supreme Court to declare that Barack Obama could not be inaugurated as president. And then I told him that the Supreme Court would not give him any answer ever. And that the reason was because the Supreme Court knew that the Constitution was declared null and void in 1938 by the Erie Railroad versus Tompkins case. And that the Supreme Court, like all courts in this nation, has taken silent judicial notice of that fact. It is now December the 28th, 2009, and the Supreme Court has still not issued an opinion as to whether or not Barack Obama is constitutionally eligible to be president. And Barack Obama remains in office. It is my opinion that this reluctance of the Supreme Court in nearly a year to afford Mr. Berg an opinion is further evidence that the Constitution of the United States is null and void. And that the Supreme Court knows that. And that they too have taken silent judicial notice of that fact. And as I have already said, they will never issue an opinion. Now let me briefly explain what the Uniform Commercial Code is. It is called the law of contract. It changes everything in America to a contract. And since two-party contracts have to be agreed by both parties, neither party can force the other into a contract. This is the reason that they cannot force us into any contract without our consent. Now this posed a problem for the international bankers because they knew the courts will declare any contract where one party forces another into signing it null and void. And the reason is that forcing someone into a contract against their will is called involuntary servitude, and is in violation not only of the Constitution, but of the Uniform Commercial Code as well. So they somehow had to make us believe that we had to sign for a contract, even when they knew there was no law requiring us to do so. This is called color of law. It sounds like a law, it acts like a law, it has the force of law, but there is no law. Let me explain this in another way. Congress has been given the power to make us believe there is a law when there is no law. Now let me show you how this works. Before I do, I want to explain that this is only a brief review. I am not an attorney, so I cannot give you legal advice. All I am trying to do is cover this story as an historian. I'm relaying information that I believe to be true as a way of educating the American people like any historian does. Now let me start. There is no law requiring any of us sovereign state citizens to get a socialist security card. So they trick us by making us believe that we must get a card when it is a voluntary act. But you say everybody knows that you have to get a socialist security card to get a job in America. But I ask those who make this statement, please show me the law. And no one has ever been able to do that. Now let me ask you to consider this. I am a self-proclaimed honorary citizen of the state of Missouri, which is called the Show Me State. That means to me, if you have something for me to consider, please provide me with some evidence. So I will now try to provide you some evidence that there is no law. And I submit the following two letters as some evidence that there is no law. This is a photocopy of a letter written by a district manager of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, dated July the 13th, 1979. This is the pertinent statement in that letter. It reads, "The Social Security Administration does not require that you have a Social Security number." Notice that the letter did not say that Congress passed House Bill number so-and-so in 1935 that required all Americans to obtain a Social Security number. If it was law, I would think that they would say exactly that. This is a copy of a January 10th, 1990 letter from a claims representative of the Health and Human Services Department of the U.S. government. And this is the sentence I wish to discuss. It says, Social Security is a voluntary system in that no one is required to get a number. That means to me that we do not have to volunteer to get a number, and that we can only get a number if we volunteer for one. But once we get a Social Security number, we're obligated to use it by contract, because we have become a naturalized citizen who has voluntarily become subject to the most oppressive government ever devised by man. So now we see that the Constitution is null and void, and that each one of us who has a Social Security card is a naturalized citizen of the most powerful government in the history of this world. Now let me return to the Great Seal of the United States. Let's study the hidden symbols using numbers. This is once again the eagle side of the Great Seal, and if you count the feathers on each wing, you would find 32 feathers on its left wing and 33 on its right. And I do not believe that this is a coincidence or an error by the artist. And to assist you in understanding the significance of the two numbers 32 and 33, I would like to explain a little about the Masonic Lodge. Every Mason in America has to go through 3 rituals called degrees, one at a time, and when he is finished, he is called a Master Mason, and a member of the Blue Lodge. He has then 2 options should he wish to go further. He can join the Scottish Rite, shown in green, with 29 more degrees for a total of 32, or he can join the York Rite, shown in yellow, with a total of 10 more for a total of 13. There is a 33rd degree on top of both of these Masonic lodges called the 33rd degree, and it is honorary, and the member must be invited into this degree. There seems to be evidence that this 33rd degree of Scottish Rite runs the entire worldwide Masonic Lodge, so they are extremely important. Now this is the eagle side of the Great Seal of the United States again. Notice that the eagle is looking towards the side with the 33 feathers. So the implication of this drawing is that the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite of Masonry runs the entire United States, and that this is a secret concealed inside the Great Seal of the United States. I remember in my high school civics class that there was a debate amongst this nation's founding fathers over whether the bald eagle or the American wild turkey should be the national bird of this nation. But my research shows that there was no debate at all. The eagle was always intended to be the national bird from the very beginning, and that the appearance of the debate was a ruse and a scam, another fire engine, or some other grain. In the books written by the key Masonic writers, the Lodge and others will convince the researcher that the eagle was an important symbol of something else. The following are 6 quotes on the subject, 5 of which were written by members of the Masonic Lodge. I will not cite the sources of each quote, but just show you the quotes without attribution. The eagle is a symbol of initiation. The eagle is of great antiquity, a symbol of the sun. The eagle was sacred to the sun. The eagle was a bird consecrated to the sun. The eagle represented the Egyptian sun god Amun-Ra. And the following quote is one of the explanations as to why the eagle is sacred to sun worship. The eagle is also supposed to be the only creature that can look directly into the sun. Now this is an interesting observation. If a human looks directly into the sun, it is quite likely that this person will go blind. But in this quote, the author was saying that the eagle can look directly into the sun without being harmed. But there is a symbolic and concealed meaning behind this statement. It conceals the symbolic thought that the eagle can get directly to the sun god and that man cannot. This appears to be the concealed meaning behind the symbology of the eagle. The eagle can do something that man cannot do, and early man apparently understood that fact, so he used the eagle as a symbol of the way to reach the sun god. But few Americans, if any, know what all of the symbols on the Great Seal mean. As I have briefly mentioned, the numbers 32 and 33 are significant to the Masonic Lodge, but the numbers show up in some rather interesting concealed locations. This is the symbol of the government of the Communist Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, meaning the old Russia. As you can see, it is a globe with what appear to be wheat stalks on either side. But the semicircle to the bottom appears to be out of place and without a logical explanation, especially when you count the rays protruding from the center, because there are 32 of them. The semicircle, which when completed would be a full circle, meaning that it could be a symbol of the sun, which when added to the 32 rays would total 33. One can only imagine what this Masonic symbol has to do with the Communist Soviet Union. The number appears once again in this, the symbol of the United Nations. First of all, the leaves on each side total 13. Do not count the base, and as shall be discussed later, the number 13 is a significant Masonic number. The globe is divided into 32 divisions, with the circle at the top. It is not complete, presumably because it would intersect with portions of the globe. Another explanation might be that the future world government has not brought the United States and Canada into the circle as of yet, because the circle, if completed, would be over the northern part of North America. And the circle plus the 32 divisions total 33 in the symbol. Once again, the Masonic numbers 32 and 33 are concealed in the symbol of the United Nations. While I am here, I would like to briefly discuss the connection between the numbers 13 and 33. We in America use a system of inches and feet as a measuring system, and a system known as the metric system uses millimeters and centimeters. If you compare a ruler of 13 inches in length side by side with a ruler of 33 millimeters in length, you will notice that the two rulers are the same length. And that is because the metric system was created by the Masons who caused the French Revolution of 1789. So this is one way you can say that 13 is equal to 33, a Masonic way of saying that Satan's number is equal to the number of the 33rd degree Masons who run the entire Masonic system. I would like to show you another concealed connection between the numbers 13 and 33. It is concealed inside the Masonic Lodge. As I said, the Masons have 3 degrees in what they call the Blue Lodge. The first degree Mason is called an entered apprentice, the second is called a fellowcraft, and the third is called a master Mason. The concealed connection is inside the 2 words Master Mason. First of all, the letter M is the 13th letter of the alphabet, and I do not believe that this is another coincidence. Now, if you separate the 2 M's from the 2 words and set them in the next 2 lines like this, and then turn the 2 words sideways, you can see that each M looks like the number 3, and the 2 of them together make them look like the number 33. So there is a concealed 13 and 33 in their choice of the words that describe their 3rd degree inside the Blue Lodge. There is a similar example of a concealed 33 contained in the name of Mickey Mouse, Walt Disney's first cartoon character. Mr. Disney and his brother Roy were members of the Masonic Lodge, and I believe Walt Disney named his initial cartoon character Mickey Mouse because he knew that this name concealed the number 33 in it. The same thing happens when you print the name Mickey Mouse and separate the 2 M letters. And then turn the name and the 2 letters sideways, and you get a concealed 33 in them as well. And notice this, there are 6 letters in the word Master and 6 letters in the word Mickey. There are 5 letters in Mason, and there are 5 letters in Mouse. Just another strange coincidence, I am sure. The Masons have been getting a lot of bad press recently, and the Masons are anxious to overcome that with favorable publicity. This is quite likely the reason that Walt Disney released 2 movies that gave a favorable image to the Masonic Lodge. The first one was the movie entitled National Treasure, released in the year 2004. And the second one was entitled Book of Secrets, and it was released in 2007. This is a picture of the room where the Security Council of the United Nations meets. If you count the number of lights in the circle of the ceiling, you would count 32 of them. 32 plus the circle they are in would be 33. Before I explain why the numbers 32 and 33 are significant, let me show you other instances where the numbers show up. This is a drawing of a woman carrying the Olympic torch through a worldwide run to publicize the Olympics to be held a few months later. According to the Olympic Committee, the torch is 32 inches long, and the flame on top would be the 33rd object. This photograph shows how the first torch is lit. The caption underneath the photograph says, Greek actresses dressed as high priestesses go through a dress rehearsal for the lighting of the flame at Olympia. So the flame is not lit by a match, but by the rays of the sun focused through a magnifying disc. So it is the sun god who lights the first torch and is lighted on Mount Olympus, where the Greek gods allegedly reside. Now I would like to start an explanation of why these two numbers 32 and 33 are significant and what they symbolically represent and why that is significant in America's history. This drawing shows Quetzalcoatl, a Latin American sun god, possibly descending from heaven on a ladder with 32 rungs. If the place he is coming from is heaven, that would mean the 33rd rung on the ladder. This is an important drawing for reasons that will be discussed later. By the way, that drawing shows that a modern-day rock and roll musician was once worshipped as a god even before he was born. This is a close-up of the guy in the upper left of the main drawing, and it clearly shows that Ringo Starr, the drummer for the Beatles, was once worshipped as a god in Latin America. Now, I'm sorry, that was supposed to be funny, and it wasn't. As I said, Ringo was worshipped way before he was even born, and if you believe me, I would like to sell you some swampland here in Arizona. And this connection will show the connection between the number 32 and the circle representing the sun being the 33rd when it is connected to the number. This is a representation of a Mayan stone cut to represent the sun and its 32 rays. Samuel Morse invented the Morse code in 1842, and that code concealed a use of the number 33. The code uses a dot and a dash, and the dash lasts the equivalent of the time it would take to end 3 dots. This is a photograph of a key used to send the Morse code key, and the key is tapped quickly for a dot and then again for a dash, but the sender waits for the time it would take to hit 3 dots before sending the next letter. This is a representation of the number of the Morse code dots and dashes in the word Lucifer, meaning the name of the devil. You will see that it consists of letters requiring 15 dots to send them, and 6 dashes, each of which is equal to 3 dots, totaling 18 dots. 15 dots plus 18 dots obviously equals 33. Just another strange coincidence, I am sure. The number 13 is also a significant number to the Masonic Lodge. This is a page from the April 1960 edition of a Masonic magazine entitled The New Age. Its name has been changed to the Scottish Rite Journal, in which the Masons discuss the mystical number 13. Notice that the top line says Masonic symbols in a $1 bill. The article says that the number 13, used repeatedly in the Great Seal of the United States, was not a coincidence. They wrote that the number has a significant Masonic connection. The article says that there were 13 leaves in the olive branches in the Great Seal, 13 bars and stripes, 13 arrows, 13 stars in the green crest, and 13 layers of stone in the pyramid. This means that the Masons are claiming that the number 13 has a Masonic importance. Now, there are some that claim that the reason that the number 13 is significant on both sides of the Great Seal is because there were 13 states in the original Union of States that formed the federal government. But it appears as if the number has a hidden significance, and that those who founded this nation waited until there were precisely 13 and not 12 or 14 states before they created the United States. But the Masons are claiming the number as one of their own, and shows, at least in this one instance, that the Masons were directly involved in the founding of this nation, and that one of the reasons we can know that is because of their interest in the number 13. But before we examine the number 13, there's another reason that the Founding Fathers selected the American eagle as our national symbol, and that is the fact that The two words American Eagle have exactly 13 letters in them. But this is not the only hidden use of the number 13. The words E Pluribus Union, one of the nation's Latin slogans, reportedly translated into one out of many, also have 13 letters in the words. On the pyramid side of the Great Seal, the two words Annuit Coeptus, meaning the announcement of or the birth of, also have 13 letters in them. There are 13 examples of the letter A on the front of the dollar bill, like finding the letter A in the words federal, states, and America, etc. There are 13 courses of stone on the pyramid. The words "In God We Trust" on the back of the dollar bill have 12 letters in them, and if you add the number of the word 1 to the 12, you get 13. The reverse of the dollar bill contains 13 examples of the number 13, like 13 olive leaves, 13 vertical stripes, etc. And the number 33, I believe, signifying the 33 degrees of the Masonic Lodge, shows up frequently as well. The words "the United States of America" at the top of both sides of the dollar bill have 24 letters in them, and the words $1 have a total of 9. Add the two together and you get 33. The word "one" has 9 parts in them, meaning 2 in the letter O, 3 in the letter N, and 4 in the letter E. If you total the shadows behind the letters, they total 11. If you add the 9 plus the 11, you will get a total of 20 units. Then you add the number 1 itself and the 12 letters in the words "In God We Trust," and you get, strangely enough, a total of 33. So the Masons have concealed their involvement in the dollar bill all over it. And only a few Americans know the true meaning of these symbols. This is a drawing of a popular flag utilized by the Americans in the Revolution of 1776. The words in the phrases "and appeal to God" and "don't tread on me" both have 13 letters in them. Please notice the snake wrapped around the tree. I will explain its significance a little later. But there are other concealed Masonic symbols in this flag. The words "in evergreen tree," meaning what appears to be an evergreen tree in the drawing, have 13 letters in them. So it was not a coincidence that these phrases have significance to the Masonic Lodge and have symbols, where were symbols selected for the flag. And by the way, the "an appeal to God" and "don't tread on me" also have 13 letters on them. Another series of hidden symbolism occurred in the selection of July the 4th, the founding date of this nation. The words have 13 letters in them. But there is another more important concealed symbol in that date, which I will explain later. The year 1776 has a hidden symbolism as well. The last two numbers in the date, meaning the 7 and the 6, when added together, total 13. As it is being shown, this is no coincidence, it is symbolic. The Founding Fathers waited precisely 13 years between 1776 and 1789 to form this nation's first government. George Washington, a very visible member of the Masons, had 12 other generals on his staff. 12 plus himself equals 13. A total of 13 people worked on the Great Seal of the United States. The Navy of the United States had a committee of 13 controlling all naval affairs, and the first fleet of ships had precisely 13 ships in it. The Confederate flag of the South, utilized during the latter stages of the American Civil War, had 13 stars on it. And if you presume that each star stood for an individual state, as it did in the American flag, there should have been only 11 stars in the Confederate flag because there were only 11 states in the Confederacy. This flag was adopted as the flag of the Confederacy in 1863, about midway in the Civil War, which lasted from 1861 to 1865. There is no way that the 11 states were anticipating the addition of 2 more states to their cause, so that there would have been 1 star for each state. 11 states started the Civil War in the Confederacy, and 11 states finished it. There is one more startling bit of evidence to consider about the involvement of the Masons in the planning of the Civil War. This is a map of the eastern part of the United States, showing a red line over the 33rd degree northern latitude. Latitudes circle the globe parallel to the equator, which means that there are 2 33rd degree latitudes, one called the 33rd degree northern latitude and the other called the 33rd degree southern latitude. The city of Charleston, South Carolina is underneath the 33rd degree northern latitude. And because it is, the Masons created their first 33rd degree temple there. And it was at Fort Sumter, located in the port of Charleston, South Carolina, where the South fired its first shots of the war. Just another interesting coincidence, I am certain. So one can only wonder how much more involvement the Masons had in the creation and continuation of the Civil War. For those who believe that the Masons do not involve themselves in wars and revolutions, this quotation from Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma should explain that they do, page 330. He wrote, "We hatch no premature revolutions. We hatch no premature revolutions." Notice that he did not say that the Masons hatch no revolutions. He wrote that they hatch no premature revolutions. That means that we hatch revolutions when the time is ripe. And to show that this is a correct interpretation of Mr. Pike's comment, one has to only refer to page 24 of his book to read this. The Masonry aided in bringing about the French Revolution of 1789. And to show the involvement of the Masons in foreign affairs, the 2 words United Nations have 13 letters as well. And here is a more contemporary use of the number 13 in America. This is a photograph of President Bill Clinton taken in the White House. The symbol off to the right of the photograph, I guess more in the middle, shaped like a seashell on top of the bookcase, has 13 parts inside the overall design. The number 13 is concealed everywhere, including inside the White House itself. The Masons even concealed their symbols in the layout of the streets of Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. George Washington, this nation's first president and a member of the Masons, hired a French Mason, Major Pierre Charles L'Enfant, an officer who had served with President Washington during the American Revolution, to lay out the streets of the city. So the city was laid out by a member of the Masons. To understand the hidden symbolism in the city streets, it becomes important to study the Masonic symbols known as the square and the compass. A square is a piece of metal cut so as to be in the form of a 90-degree right angle. The compass is, of course, a device that consists of 2 legs formed at the top used to draw circles. The letter G in the center stands for Gnosis, and not God, as is claimed by some Masons. And Gnosis is Latin for knowledge, meaning spiritual knowledge about who the true God is that the Masons worship as their God. We shall examine that statement a little later as well. When combined in this manner, these become the 2 symbols of the Masonic Lodge. Once the observer turns the square and compass sideways, then compares them to the layout of the streets of Washington, D.C., the map will reveal some of its secrets, because the city is laid out with many of the squares, angled lines, and circles consistent with the square and compass of the Masonic Lodge. This is a photograph of part of a map of the nation's capital. The Capitol building is shown in red on the right. It appears as if the square and compass has been laid out in the streets around and on top of the Capitol building itself, shown in the gray area to the right. It certainly appears that the Masons are attempting to conceal the fact that they consider the Capitol building to be under their control. And this is a layout of the original, a photocopy rather, of the original layout. You will notice numerous squares and compasses designed into the city. And to show you that the Masons created this nation, let me show you this drawing of George Washington laying the cornerstone of the Capitol building on September the 18th, 1793. Notice that nearly all of the other participants are wearing their Masonic jewelry and aprons. And on the 200th anniversary of the laying of the cornerstone, the Masons repeated the ceremony with Senator Strom Thurmond, a 33rd degree Mason, shown here under the tripod to the left, doing the honors. So it appears as if Albert Pike was correct when he wrote in his book entitled Morals and Dogma, "The world will soon come to us," meaning the Masons, "for its sovereigns," apparently meaning its governmental leaders, and pontiffs, apparently meaning its religious leaders. "We shall be rulers over the masters of the world." So the Masons will be the secret power behind the religions and the governments of the world. It appears that the American people have been, quote, "coming to us," unquote, meaning the Masons, for over 200 years for its sovereigns. End of part 3. Please hold for part 4. Part 4 of 4. But the Masonic involvement in the history of this nation does not end here. There is more to be learned about their involvement in the founding of this nation. If you multiply the number 13 by itself, meaning 13 by 13 obviously, the result is 169. If you subtract the number from the year of the founding of this nation, in other words 1776, you will arrive at the year 1607, the date that the first settlers arrived in America. If you add the number 169 to 1776, you will get the year 1945. The year that Harry Truman, the President of the United States, dropped the 2 atomic bombs on Christians in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. By the way, Harry Truman did not have to drop those 2 bombs to end World War II with Japan. He knew that Japan was trying to surrender. That is all documented in my book entitled The Unseen Hand. Now, if you number the number of days, or count the number of days, between July the 4th, 1945, and August the 6th, 1945, the day they dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima, you will discover that they total 33 days. And in one more coincidence, if you add the number of the letters and numbers in August the 6th, 1945, you will find that they total 33. Harry Truman, by the way, was by the way of the strangest of coincidences, the 33rd President of the United States. He was a 32nd degree when he decided to drop the bombs when he didn't have to, but was made an honorary 33rd degree just a few months later. This is an official portrait of the President dressed in his Masonic attire. The Ku Klux Klan was founded in 1867, and if you will notice, there are 3 K's in their name. K is the 11th letter in the alphabet, so once again, 3 times 11 is 33. Another strange coincidence. World War I ended on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, and the sum of the 3 11s is obviously 33. This is a picture of NASA's orbiter Discovery landing at their Kennedy Space Center in Florida on runway 33. Many of the nation's astronauts have been members of the Masonic Lodge. There are 33 balloon floats in the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade. There are 33 cars in the starting grid for an Indianapolis Speedway 500-mile race. Let me now try to offer an explanation of why these conspirators revere the number 33. This is a drawing of the human backbone, and if you count the number of the vertebrae, there are 32 of them. The skull is attached to the backbone, and it would be the 33rd vertebrae if it was one. The human skull is the home of the mind, man's ability to think. And these conspirators want to be totally free to determine for themselves what is right and wrong. So that is why they revere the number 33. The number 33 stands for the seat of their ability to reason, to freely think for themselves. And the next slide might be partial corroboration that the number 33 has something to do with the human skull. This is a woman from the Padang area of Indonesia, and their culture asks some of the women to put rings around the neck as they age. However, no woman is ever asked to put on more than 32 rings, meaning the head would become the number 33. Now, I don't know how they learned that there were 32 vertebrae in the human backbone, but if they did it for this reason we've been talking about, then the head would be, of course, the 33rd vertebrae. Once again, just another strange coincidence. But perhaps this is the most pertinent explanation of why the conspirators revere the number 33. This is a map of the area in Iraq around the city of Baghdad. The red line represents the 33rd degree northern latitude, just a few miles north of the city of Babylon, the home of the ancient mystery religion. That means that it can be said that the 33rd degree northern latitude runs through the city of Babylon, since each latitude is several miles wide between the two neighboring latitude lines. And I think that is the real reason that the Masons place such importance on the number 33. There are certainly many other instances of the use of symbols in the numbers 13, 32, and 33. But since they were only coincidences, I do not want to spend too much time on the others that I have found. But there are certainly many, but I just wanted to show you a few because I do not believe that they are coincidences. And to show you that the Masons are major players in the past, let me show you confirmation of this fact from two quotations taken from two books written by Manly P. Hall, one of the major writers in support of the Masonic Lodge because he was a 33rd degree Mason. Masonry is the most powerful organization in the land. It is an ordainer of kings. Its hand has shaped the destinies of worlds. But let me continue to discuss their involvement in this nation's past. The streets of Washington, D.C. contain another hidden symbol, one that must be explained first. The five-pointed star is a common symbol utilized in a variety of ways. The star on the left is a photograph of one of the stars in the flag of the United States, where each of the 50 of them symbolizes one of the 50 states. That star is placed with one of its 5 points up and 2 of its points down. However, the star can also be reversed, so that only 1 point is down and 2 are up. And that, of course, is represented by the star on the right. This star, with 1 point down, is a symbol of the Eastern Star, a Masonic organization for women. And here is the Eastern Star shown on a fez, a hat apparently worn by members of this Masonic group. This difference between the two stars are explained in a book entitled History of Freemasonry and Concordant Orders, published in 1891 by a series of 78 high-ranking members of the Masonic Lodge. One of their members, William R. Singleton, a 33rd degree Mason, wrote about the star in his article entitled The Divine Plan. This is that portion of the article showing the two stars, one with 1 point up and the other with 1 point down. Notice that the drawing on the right shows the head of a goat inside of it, obviously referring to the goat of Mendes, a symbol of the devil. This is how the article described the two stars. This star, having 5 points, 5 rays rather, represents God. All that is pure, virtuous, and good, when represented with 1 point upward. But when turned with 1 point down, it represents evil. All that is opposed to the good, pure, and virtuous. It represents the goat of Mendes. This is a drawing of the goat of Mendes shown on the cover of a book about witchcraft written by a practicing witch. Notice that the drawing shows a goat head on a human body. Notice also that the goat has female breasts, indicating that the goat is bisexual. This thought about the five-pointed star is repeated on page 101 of the same book. When the star elevates 2 of its points, it represents Satan, or the goat of the mysteries. And here is the five-pointed star laid out in the streets north of and above the White House, the box at the low middle of the map, the home of the President of the United States. By the way, the black rectangle shown on the top center is the 33rd degree Masonic Temple in Washington, D.C. I'm sure it is a coincidence that it is precisely 13 blocks north of the White House. Now, I would like to discuss the connection between the number 13, the star, and Satan, also known as Lucifer or the devil. Standeo, in his book entitled The Cosmic Conspiracy, stated, 13 is the value assigned to represent Satan. But there are other explanations of the number 13, one of which was offered by Manly P. Hall, the Mason, who said that there were 12 great religions in the world, and the 13th was the one concealed inside the other 12. What I believe he was saying was that there was a secret worship of a particular god in each of the 12 other great religions. And my research has indicated to me that that particular god concealed in the 12 great religions of the world is Lucifer, also called Satan, or the devil. I would like to explain what this means. Let's say that all the believers in Osiris, the Egyptian sun god, are inside the circle. Everyone else is outside the circle because they do not believe in Osiris. Inside the circle is a small percentage of believers, shown by the red dot in the center, who share a common secret. And that secret is that Osiris is in truth Lucifer, also called Satan or the devil. Those who believe this are called adepts, princes, or illuminated ones, and their task is to keep the secret from the rest of the believers. This is what Mr. Hall was saying. And I would like to add my own opinion as to why the number 13 is significant to these conspirators. 6 is the number of man, and 7 is the number of completion or perfection. If the two numbers are added together, the total is 13, or perfected man. This secret worship believes that through it man can become perfect. In fact, the conspiracy believes that we common people have progressed to the point of being Homo sapiens man through evolution. And they, the illuminated ones, have evolved higher into a higher form of mankind called Homo noeticus man. The word noetic is Greek for the mind or the intellect. So the number 13 contains a secret, hidden, occult meaning, and that is why the number 13 is significant and symbolic. There is one more significant insight as to why this nation's founding fathers chose the date of July the 4th to declare America's independence from Great Britain. The old Julian calendar was changed in the year 1582 by an order of Pope Gregory the 13th. I wonder if it is important to note that this Pope, the 13th one to change his name to Gregory, was the one to change the calendar. I'm certain it's just another coincidence. The acknowledged reason was because the old calendar was 11 days behind the sun. In other words, the old calendar was no longer accurate in measuring the solar year. So the astronomers were having difficulty in measuring the time it took for the Earth to make one complete revolution around the sun. So in October of 1582, the old June the 23rd became July the 4th. And to explain this, I would like to explain what this means. And just so you will understand, I've exaggerated the distances on the horizon between the setting of the sun on various days. If you were to mark the horizon every evening as the sun sets, you would notice that it appears to move up and then down as it sets each night. The sun moves south each night until December 22nd, and then it sets at the same spot each night for 3 days. And then on December 25th each year, the sun starts moving north again. It sets at a site which is north of the setting sun the night before. And then on June the 21st or 22nd, the sun stops again for 3 nights. So June the 23rd is 2 days after the summer solstice, the day that the sun appears to be stopped after making its way north of the equator. It would be the next night to the last night before the sun starts moving south again. The sun worshippers celebrate on the night when the sun starts its direction in the opposite direction, because they are pleased that the sun did not die on in the 3 days. So June the 23rd and 24th are nights of celebration, because it was a day of recognition for those who thought the sun and therefore the sun god died on each June the 22nd. That day ended at sunset, so after that moment, the next day started, and this was the day the sun actually started its journey home. Babylonians in the past celebrated that night by lighting bonfires to Baal, their sun god. and Americans light fires in the sky called fireworks after sunset on July the 4th. Observers will quickly note that this is the only American holiday that is traditionally celebrated by fireworks. So here we see a connection between the celebration of July the 4th and sun worship. So the Founding Fathers concealed a holiday to the sun god in the choice of the date of July the 4th to declare their independence from Great Britain. It appears that many things once thought unexplainable have an explanation after all. One must only look. The Great Seal is represented on the back of the dollar bill, contains other symbols that have generally not been explained to the American people. I'd like to finish my study of the eye above the pyramid. Manly P. Hall, the 33rd degree Mason, and perhaps the greatest writer in history in support of the mystery religion, wrote this: "The eye above the pyramid represents the radiant emblem of the great architect of the universe, the title of the Masonic God." The following are 4 quotes about eyes as symbols from writers studying the issue. The eye was also the symbol of Osiris. Osiris, the sun and principle of good. Osiris was the chief god of the Egyptians. Osiris was the sun. An eye in honor of the great eye of the universe, the sun. So here is the first mention of the eye being both a symbol of the sun and, in fact, of the god who is symbolized by the sun. So it appears that the eye above the pyramid on the back of the American dollar bill is the eye of Osiris, a symbol of the sun god. One can only conclude that our founding fathers knew what they were doing. Not only did they conceal their ancient secret religion in the Great Seal of the United States, they also concealed it in the name of this nation. This next subject is perhaps the most controversial point I will be discussing in this presentation, so please get ready for it. Please remember that I asked you to be a member of a jury and that you had to be open, because this is very controversial and I would like you to at least hear it and then make your own decision as to whether or not you will accept it. So providing you with that warning, I will now proceed. The first thing I would like to discuss is this statement in the Bible, because it will be the key to understanding what I will be discussing for the next few minutes. Revelation 12, chapter 12, verse 9. That old serpent called the devil was Satan, and Satan was cast out into the earth. And the reason this is significant is because whole cultures all over the earth have been worshiping the serpent or the snake in their religions. So please keep that in mind as we examine the following evidence. William Josiah Sutton, in his book entitled The Illuminati 666, added another very important piece of the puzzle to the story. This is what he wrote. The ancient Mayans, meaning the Mayan Indian tribe of the Yucatan in Mexico, a peninsula on the northeast side of Mexico, worshipped the serpent god under the name of Kan. Here we find the origin of the American word canny, shrewd, or serpent-like. The Babylonians worshipped Kan or Kan, the serpent, and Val, the god of fire. The Romans combined the words into Vulcan, the god of fire, from whence comes our word volcano. This seems to be how the Mayans and the Mexicans named their gods. They too combined 2 words to describe their serpent god. Hence, Kulkul means beautiful bird, and Kan means serpent. Kulkulkan means bird serpent in the Mayan language. This is the exact same meaning for Quetzalcoatl, the Mexican god. The cosmic symbol for Quetzalcoatl was a feathered serpent. The statement that Quetzalcoatl was the god of the Mexicans was partially confirmed in this photograph of an Indian dancing with a snake in his mouth. The caption underneath the picture reads in part, "The snake represents the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl." There was one similarity between all of these cultures. They worshipped the serpent god. I would like to start the discussion with this drawing that shows the Mayan Queen Mu as a child consulting the soothsayer. It shows the queen is receiving the words from their serpent god, but through the mouth of a soothsayer. The queen is shown on the left side of the drawing inside the red rectangle with her left hand on her face as she is seated facing the soothsayer. She is depicted as a young child, perhaps in her early teens. The soothsayer is shown in the green rectangle as she is seated in front of the queen with what appears to be a little table between them. She is shown in front of two other women and two huts. Behind the soothsayer is the yellow rectangle. In the yellow rectangle is a huge serpent which towers above the scene. Notice that it has its mouth open, and if it is speaking to the soothsayer, as if it is speaking to the soothsayer and the queen as well. The book that included this drawing in the pages said that the winged serpent behind her represented the protective genius of the Mayan Empire. So the snake serpent protected the Mayans. This is a representation of Prince Ko of the Mayans in the heat of battle. His head is near the center of the drawing, and behind him and taller than it appears to be the winged serpent, also representing the protective genius of the Mayan Empire. So the serpent was an important part of the worship of the Mayan and Aztec people, which means that it was an important part of the South American culture before the latest or the earliest Europeans landed in America. The American people have been told by the majority of the historians who have examined this nation's past that the name America was named after Amerigo Vespucci, supposedly the navigator for Christopher Columbus. But there is an alternative explanation. William Still, in his book entitled New World Order, offers the following explanation. The name America may be the product of secret societies. In an 1895 magazine named Lucifer, James Price gave an insight into the meaning of the word America. He said that the supreme god of the Mayan culture of Central America, known as Quetzalcoatl elsewhere, was known as Amaru in Peru. Amaru's territory was known as Amaracu. According to Price, from the latter comes the word America. America is translated land of the serpent. Mr. Price was not the only one to make this claim. Robert B. Stacy Mudd wrote a book entitled Atlantis, Mother of Empires, in which he attempts to make the claim that the Mayans came from the nation known as Atlantis, an island that allegedly sank during an earthquake. Now, this is not the place to examine his charges, but he does draw another startling conclusion. Quetzalcoatl, the Mayan god, was known as Kukulkan amongst the Aztecs. In Peru, he was known as Amaru. But all of these names have an identical meaning, the feathered serpent. From the Peruvian name comes America. This is a photograph of a feathered serpent in the 33rd degree Masonic Temple in Washington, D.C. Notice that the head of the serpent has wings. It is a feathered serpent. The feathered serpent would have flown from the old world to the new world, meaning America. By the way, notice that the swastika in the ornamental metalwork above the feathered serpent shown under the two red arrows. The swastika is also a symbol of the sun god and may be drawn two ways, one the reverse of the other. One way is called the evil swastika and the other is called the good swastika. This is a photograph of the swastika, the official symbol of Adolf Hitler's Nazi party. Notice that this is the evil form of the swastika, and it has been reported that Hitler knew the difference between the two forms of the symbol and that he intentionally selected this, the evil form. It was under this sun god symbol utilized by Adolf Hitler in the war that his government started that Hitler killed 53 million people under the sign of the sun god, the concealed Lucifer, Satan, or the devil. Mr. Steele adds one of the thoughts of another writer who claims to know the truth about the origin of the name America. It is important to note that not only are the people living in the United States of America Americans, all of the people who live in the New World are Americans. The continents are called North America and South America, and regions are called Latin America and Central America. Here is the official position as written by Manly P. Hall, one of the greatest Masons of all time, in his book entitled America's Assignment. Since the serpent is frequently a symbol of Lucifer, it is no exaggeration to extrapolate from this that America may well mean, please America, hold on, this is not going to be pleasant, land of Lucifer, also called Satan, the devil. So that revelation that America was named after Amaru, another name for the feathered serpent god. And the feathered serpent is a symbol of Lucifer, another name for Satan, the devil, is quite possibly the true explanation of the naming of America. I am convinced that all of what we have studied so far has convinced me that America was named after Lucifer by our founding fathers. That means that this nation's founding fathers knew that. They were announcing the birth of the New World Order when they dedicated this nation to Lucifer, also known as Satan or the devil. They knew who America was named after. That is why they placed the Great Pyramid, a symbol of the temple of initiation, into Lucifer worship and the reverse side of the Great Seal of the United States. That is why they placed the Eye of Osiris, the sun god, concealing worship of Lucifer above his house on the reverse side of the Great Seal. That is why they waited to form this nation after there were 13 states. That is why they selected the American eagle as this nation's national bird. That is why they declared their independence on July 4th, a concealed sun holiday. I would like to go back and remind you that the pyramid on the back of our dollar bill is a symbol of the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt, and then show you that those who built the Egyptian pyramid connected it to Lucifer, Satan, the devil. They connected the building of the Great Pyramid of Khufu with the mystical number 13. This is a book entitled The Mysteries of Chartres, I presume, I don't know how to pronounce it, Cathedral. I won't spend time on discussing the connection between this Catholic cathedral and the Masons, but this author discusses the pyramid in Egypt, and it is this that I would like to spend a few moments on. He makes the observation that the Egyptian pyramid is built on an angle of inclination of 51 degrees and 25 minutes. And then he makes the observation that the angle can no longer be measured exactly because the polished limestone facing on the outside of the pyramid has disappeared. Now this is a line divided into 13 equal sections. And if you take a line, this line, and create a triangle with sides of 4 sections and a base of 5, you get the angles in the sides of 51 degrees and 19 minutes. This is extremely close to the estimation of the angle of inclination on the Great Pyramid of Giza. And then I would like to remind you that 13 is the value assigned to represent Satan. It appears as if those who built the Great Pyramid of Giza concealed the fact that it was dedicated to Lucifer in the angle of inclination. They knew. It all seems to fit together. Now let me briefly prove that the Masons who named this nation and then established it knowingly worshipped Lucifer, also called Satan, the devil. And to start, I'm going to take 3 different thoughts and link them together so that we can understand the secret inside the Masonic Lodge. This is a quotation from Albert Pike, the leader of the worldwide Masonic movement, in his book entitled Liturgy. The symbols and ceremonies of Masonry have more than one meaning. They rather conceal than disclose the truth. They hint it only, at least, and their varied meanings are only to be discovered by reflection and study. So as I said, I shall take 3 different thoughts and reflect and study their concealed secrets so that we can draw some conclusions. I would like to recommend that you consider reading my 3rd book entitled Masonry, Conspiracy Against Christianity, in which I spend a lot more time proving this claim. But let me make a brief review of this subject. This is the first link. The initiate Mason, in his first degree called the Entered Apprentice, apprentice degree in the Blue Lodge, is brought before the worshipful master, the equivalent of their president, by the brother orator, and he asks the brother orator, apparently the equivalent of the vice president, what does thou ask, or what do you ask for this candidate? And the orator answers for the initiate, light. So the first link is the fact that the initiate asks for light. The second link consists in the fact that the word light is not defined, as far as I can tell, by reading the entire first degree ritual, but it is answered in the 3rd degree ritual, where the Mason is taught this. The all-seeing eye symbolizes the true knowledge of the deity and is the light of which the Mason travels in search. Notice that the Mason does not find the true knowledge of deity in the Bible or in his church or synagogue. He finds it in the Masonic Lodge. If he doesn't find it in his church, that means that the deity is not the God of the Bible, because you learn the true knowledge in Masonry. So therefore it is some other God. So the second link is the fact that the light the Mason searches for is the true knowledge of deity found in the lodge itself. Now, in the 3rd piece of the chain is found in this book, Morals and Dogma, written by Albert Pike, the Mason, who wrote the rituals for all 33 degrees in the Masonic Lodge. He wrote this in the explanation of the 19th degree ritual of the Masonic Lodge. This is contained on page 321 of Morals and Dogma. Lucifer, the light bearer, is it he who bears the light? Doubt it not. I would like to confirm that Lucifer is the light bearer by defining the name from Webster's dictionary. Lucifer is a Latin name made by joining together two separate words to form one word. Lucifer is Latin for light, and Fere is Latin, I presume that's the pronunciation, is Latin for bearer or bringer. So Lucifer is defined as the light bearer. Now let me return to the subject of the three links. Notice what the Masons have just done. They put together three separate links into a chain, and the Mason is then supposed to link the three together in the following manner. Link number one, the Mason asks for light. Link number two, he is told that the light is the true knowledge of deity. And then, link number three, he is taught that Lucifer is the light bearer. That means he is to take these separate statements and link them together to conclude that Lucifer, Satan, also known as the devil, is the true God. Notice that the Masons can never say it directly, or millions of their members would quit. So they conceal it in their own words. May I remind you that Albert Pike wrote, "If you reflect, my brother, you will no doubt suspect that some secret meaning was concealed in these words." And the reason they had to conceal this truth from the average Mason is because if they said it directly, most of the Masons would leave the lodge. Because the secret meaning concealed in their words is their belief that Lucifer, the devil, is the true knowledge of deity. So they had to conceal it. But the Mason who studies and reflects will be able to figure it out. But there is one more statement that we must examine before we leave this subject. And that is taken from Albert Pike's book entitled Legenda. Masonry permits the utterance of false interpretations, which serve the double purpose of misleading the ignorant, the idle, and indolent. And of course, the word indolent is defined as the lazy, whom it is desirable to lead astray. So here we can see that Albert Pike, considered by most Masons to be the greatest Mason of all time, is calling his brothers who do not see the secret ignorant. That doesn't seem to be very brotherly to me. Now let me show you that the Masons do not teach that the God who created the universe is the true deity. The first 10 words of the Bible are, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." That means that God created the universe out of nothing. Notice that there was a beginning, meaning that there was a time before the creation when there was no universe. Because if the universe was already there, there would have been no beginning. But the Masons do not believe in the Creator God. Let me quote Albert Pike once again. This quote comes from page 109 of Pike's explanation of the 29th degree in his book entitled Agenda. And this is what he wrote. "To say that the world came forth from nothing is to propose a monstrous absurdity." That means that the Masons consider a belief in the Creator God to be a monstrous absurdity, because they believe that the universe has been here forever. I've shown you the actual words of the Masons to show you that they call their God the great architect of the universe. Architects do not build anything. They draw plans for builders to build things. But even those builders do not create the building materials out of nothing. They build with pre-existing materials, or at least change the materials from one form to another, like pre-existing trees to lumber to build their houses with. I've shown you the evidence that they connect the Masonic God to a worship of the sun god, and Albert explained that their sun god is not a builder either. Amun-Ra was an Egyptian sun god, and Albert Pike wrote this on page 281 of Morals and Dogma. The supreme being of the Egyptians was Amun, a secret and concealed god, and the original light. He creates nothing. So the original light, the sun god, is a concealed god, and he created nothing. And it was not Lucifer who created the universe, it was the creator God. So the Masons are teaching their initiates that the true knowledge of deity is that Lucifer, Satan the devil, is the true God. And it was the Masons who founded America. Now I believe you can now see that all of what we have covered during this presentation makes sense. This is why our founding fathers lied to us. They were concealing their belief of knowledge of the true God in our history. And that is why they named America after Amaru, a sun god, and a concealed name of Lucifer, another name for Satan or the devil. It all makes sense. America's secret destiny is the New World Order, a civilization without a belief in the Creator God, a civilization led by their true God, Lucifer, the devil. And to show you exactly what this New World Order is, I would like to quote two modern authorities on the subject. And this information will show you that what is happening in America today is to further advance us into this new civilization called the Novus Ordo Seclorum, the New World Order. The first of these two is Al Gore, the former Vice President of the United States and the current champion of the global warming cause. He wrote another book in 1992 entitled Earth in Balance, and it tells us about how we are going to get all of these changes. He explained on page 48, our challenge is to accelerate the needed change in thinking about our relationship to the environment in order to shift the pattern of our civilization to a new equilibrium. Little change will be evident until a threshold is passed. Let me remind you that a threshold is a narrow piece of wood or metal that is placed between the outside and the inside, and it is crossed in a split second when you step over it. That means that Mr. Gore is saying that there is a single crisis coming that will cause enormous things to happen. Mr. Gore does not define what that single crisis is, but on a more defined or dignified note, it is possible, maybe, that the winning of his Nobel Peace Prize might be the very event that is going to trigger what is about to happen. He goes on to tell us what those things are. And then, as key assumptions are modified, a flood of dramatic changes will occur all at once. And on page 163, he explained what the price will be if we do not modify these key assumptions. Unless we find a way to drastically change our civilization and our way of thinking about the relationship between humankind and the earth, our children will inherit a wasteland. Apparently Al Gore thinks that the threshold is global warming. So this is why we are experiencing a rash of claims that global warming will utterly destroy this planet, and that we will be so frightened by this impending disaster that we will totally remake our civilization. Now let me bring you to another individual, a second one, warning us about some dramatic changes coming. This is Alvin Toffler, who wrote this book entitled The Third Wave in 1980. This book describes him as one of the world's best-known social thinkers and a futurist, and that his works are read in more than 50 countries. And let me add that Mr. Toffler is in agreement with the changes that he wrote about, and I am in total opposition. These are his comments. Beneath the seemingly senseless events, that there lies a startling and potentially hopeful pattern. Many of today's changes are not independent of one another, nor are they random. They are, in fact, parts of a much larger phenomenon: the death of industrialization. That means that we will no longer enjoy the fruits of an industrialized society, meaning we will no longer produce more electrical appliances, tools, cars, etc. What else could he mean by that? Middle-class America, those who enjoy the products of an industrialized society, will have to be eliminated. How do you accomplish that? One way is to cause an economic depression where workers lose their jobs and cannot pay for their middle-class lifestyle. Another way is to export all of our industrial jobs to foreign nations. No jobs means they cannot afford their cars, appliances, tools, etc. Ultimately, it means the destruction of the middle class. Mr. Toffler went on. This new civilization is slowly emerging in our lives, and blind men like Ralph Epperson are trying to suppress it. This new civilization brings with it new family styles. America for over 200 years was built upon the family, consisting of a husband and a wife and children, if any. But today America is legalizing marriages of 2 men and 2 women. In other words, the traditional family is being downplayed and other forms of marriage are being created. This new civilization brings with it changed ways of working. America used to be an industrial giant among the nations of the world. America in the past produced the highest standard of living amongst the nations of the world, meaning other nations were living in poverty, and we had a high standard of living, and we enjoyed the benefits of the free enterprise system. But now high-paying jobs are being exported to other nations, resulting in lower wages in America. And this is being done to lower our standard of living. In other words, it is intended for us to lose our high standard of living and to live with less, just like the socialized nations of the world with a lower standard of living. This new civilization brings with it changed ways of loving. America's public schools are teaching that homosexuality and lesbianism are alternative lifestyles. The movies and television programs are featuring homosexuals and lesbians in their productions as a way of changing our ways of loving. This new civilization brings with it changed ways of living. Many Americans are now living together without marriage, whereas in the past, couples got married before they lived together. That means that we are changing our ways of living. This new civilization brings with it a new economy. America is currently experiencing an economic downturn, and it was planned to happen by those in favor of the New World Order. People are losing their homes and personal property because they have lost their jobs and can no longer meet their monthly payments. This new civilization brings with it political conflicts. Communism used to be this nation's biggest political conflict, and now Russia, the major communist nation, has divided and rejected the economic philosophy of Karl Marx, the father of communism. And now our new political conflict is radical Islam and terrorism. Mr. Toffler continues with his thoughts in his book entitled The Third Wave. The dawn of this new civilization is the single most explosive fact of our lifetimes. Humanity faces the deepest social upheaval and creative restructuring of all time. Now he said, notice here that he's saying that he is in support of this social upheaval. We are engaged in building a remarkable new civilization from the ground up. The jolting changes we are now experiencing are not chaotic or random, but that they form a sharp, clearly discernible pattern. When we finally understand this, many seemingly senseless events become suddenly comprehensible. And that ends the comments by Alvin Toffler. Simply stated, all of these changes in the way we live our lives are called the New World Order. And they are being orchestrated by a conspiracy of Masons and others. This nation is going somewhere because it was promised in 1782 by this nation's founding fathers who had a hidden vision for this nation. If you want to study just what this New World Order is in more detail, may I suggest that you consider purchasing my book entitled The New World Order. Then you might also consider watching my 14-hour lecture series on 7 VHS tapes entitled The New World Order. And you will actually read the words of those who are in favor of changing the very way we live our lives. All of these materials are available through the Publius Press catalog at the end of this DVD. Now let me return with this last thought. If you do not know the Creator God, may I suggest that you consider reading my booklet entitled God Exists, Proof for the Skeptic. You can know with scientific certainty that the Creator God exists because your own answers to my 3 questions will show you that. Science, logic, reason proves that the Creator God exists. I would like to close with this rather amusing photograph that has made the rounds of the internet some time ago. It shows a hunter sleeping with his rifle in his lap and a deer sneaking in while he's asleep to eat his lunch. I would like to use this photograph to illustrate a point. We are the sleeping hunter. And while we are sleeping, this conspiracy is secretly sneaking in to eat our lunch. And my admonition to you is this. It is time to wake up. Thank you so very much, and may God bless America.